Their Deputy Prime Minister has bizarrely blamed the UK and even the Rwanda bill. But after another arson attack on an asylum hotel last night, around about an hour from Dublin, an Irish political leader will tell GB News why the blame lies solely with Ireland's out-of-touch politicians. And tomorrow, a group of pro-Israeli protesters calling themselves Enough is Enough will stage a counter-demo against the latest pro-Palestine march. And the group's leader will join me in the studio to tell us why. And GB News' political editor Chris Hope earlier on today asked Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves how involved Tony Blair is in the Labour Party. And her frank answer might give you sleepless nights. You'll not want to miss out on this one, and that's all coming up in your next hour. Well, the show, we've got an absolute corker coming up today, packed with action. Is Blair the backseat Prime Minister in waiting? Is Humza Yousaf a dead man walking? Is Ireland on the brink? And we've got the legendary political pollster John Curtis predicting there will be a second referendum to rejoin the European Union. How soon and why? Well, those answers are coming up. But look, this show is nothing without you and your views. And let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join in the conversation, or message me on our socials. And we're, of course, at GB News. But before all of that, brace yourselves, because it's your headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Thanks, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Humza Yousaf says he will not resign as Scotland's First Minister ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. He says that as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday, but Humza Yousaf says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays up, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition that will not be taking part. It will be getting, of course, on with the job. And when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
In other news, students in Paris have occupied the prestigious Sciences Po University to demand the institution condemns Israel's actions in Gaza. Chanting their support for the Palestinians and waving flags, many of the protesters can also be seen wearing headscarves and face coverings in solidarity with the people of Gaza. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. A 20-year-old man has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. Dylan Earl is accused of masterminding an arson plot on London's businesses after allegedly being recruited as a Russian spy. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, but were not required to enter any pleas. A primary school teacher has pled guilty mid-trial to murdering her partner and burying his body in their garden. 50-year-old Fiona Beale had initially admitted the lesser offence of manslaughter, stabbing 42-year-old Nicholas Billingham due to loss of control, but denied murder. His partly mummified remains were discovered 4.5 months after he was last seen in 2021. Sentencing will take place next month. And in the US, the actress Ashley Judd says the overturning of Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction is an institutional betrayal. Her allegations of sexual assault by the Hollywood producer helped spark the Me Too movement. A major film star in the 1990s, she sued Weinstein in 2018, claiming he damaged her career after she rejected his advances. His 2020 rape conviction was overturned yesterday after a New York court ruled that he didn't receive a fair trial. The district attorney will now determine whether to seek a retrial, though he remains in prison for other crimes. Ashley Judd says the courts haven't served the needs of victims.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. and our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence. I stand shoulder to shoulder with women who have bloody knees, because male sexual violence may knock us down, but we get right back up. And together we are in this struggle for freedom from male entitlement to our bodies.
2 men have been charged with immigration offences after the deaths of 5 migrants, including a young girl who were trying to cross the English Channel. Yian Both, who's 22 and from South Sudan, and Tajdeen Abdulaziz Yuma, who's also 22 and from Sudan, were both charged with offences related to the deadly incident. The 5 migrants were on one of many packed boats that pushed off from the beach at Wimereux in France on Tuesday morning. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves told GBNews the government is failing to stop the boats.
We've got asylum seekers in hotels up and down the country, in hotels that were once used for local functions, for weddings, for graduations. And it is not acceptable that the government have lost control of the borders in the way that they have. Labour have got a plan to crack down on the criminal gangs at the heart of this, and also to ensure that we properly process the claims, and then people who have got no right to be in this country are quickly deported.
And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you, Sophia. Now let's get cracking. And as speculation continues to mount over whether Scotland's First Minister will stay in post following the collapse of his power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Greens, a defiant Humza Yousaf had this response to the question of whether or not he will resign.
No, I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition that will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job, and when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
For now, he fights on, but motions of no confidence have been tabled in both Humza Yousaf's premiership and now also his government. But whilst he insists he will make minority government work, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar claims it is a question of when, not if, the First Minister resigns. Well, I'm joined now by GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Tony, welcome to the show. Another day of high drama, and once again the sun is shining on you, but the storm clouds are gathering for Humza Yousaf. What's the latest?
Good afternoon. Well, certainly another lively day, shall we say, in Scottish politics. You know, almost as rare an occurrence as 2 days of sunshine back to back, I think we'll find. But nevertheless, Humza Yousaf, he cancelled that earlier appointment in Glasgow, that 12 o'clock talk on independence and the labour market at Strathclyde University, instead opting for a social housing press appointment in Dundee. And he, try as he might, he was trying to address the reason why he was there as the press spoke to him in Dundee, but of course there were much bigger fish to fry in his conversations with the press, namely, what is he going to do? Has he considered his position? And defiantly he said repeatedly that he has not considered his position, nor does he intend to, which is quite incredible really when you think about the blood in the water and the sharks seemingly circling in just the last 36 hours, how he could possibly not even have considered what could come next. And next, of course, we do have those 2 votes of no confidence. First of all, tabled by Douglas Ross yesterday, a vote of no confidence in Humza Yousaf himself as First Minister for his failings in government. Now, we've obviously heard over the last 24 hours that Scottish Labour, Lib Dems and of course the Scottish Conservatives, who have already signed that motion so it will go to Parliament next week, well, they are going to vote against Humza Yousaf. The Greens also came out last night to say their intention is to vote against Humza Yousaf, which makes Ash Reagan, yesterday we called her the Kingmaker, today I'm calling her the King Breaker, because all the power is certainly in her hands. Now on to the second vote. Of course, if Humza Yousaf, if a vote of no confidence is found against him, well, it doesn't look particularly good on him, but yet he can limp on, as untenable as that may be. However, a vote of no confidence in the government, well, that would essentially put us on an election footing here in Scotland before Westminster of all things, which is quite incredible. However, Alba has come out and said that, you know, we should be beware of the glee. The political opponents should be beware of their glee, and that, you know, they, I don't think, have quite decided on how they're going to approach that. But Patrick Harvey, obviously co-leader of the Greens, and jilted yesterday morning behind me here at the First Minister resident of Bute House in Edinburgh. Well, he came out and said that it's pretty clear that Humza Yousaf will be unable to unite Holyrood, and he's urged the SNP to consider a replacement. Who might that be? So many questions left unanswered, and yet every hour that I get to speak to you, it certainly seems like new things are happening all the time here.
Tony Maguire, high drama north of the border. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And join me now in our studio in Westminster is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, an astonishing, what appears to be, end game now. And what a bitter irony, some might call it, a beautiful karma that Ash Regan, who was in the SNP, went for the leadership campaign herself, finished third, left the party over the gender recognition bill. Now, the future is in her hands. Well, it really is an absolutely extraordinary story. I mean, you couldn't write it. The SNP is one seat short of a majority in Holyrood, and the only other pro-independence MSP in that parliament is Ash Reagan from the Alba party, Alex Salmond's breakaway party. She fell out big time with Humza Yousaf, and Humza Yousaf ended up saying that she was no loss to the SNP. Well, he might be regretting those words now, because if she votes against Humza Yousaf in this vote of no confidence, which we're expecting to be held next week, then that is his leadership over. You could argue that it's his leadership over in the medium to long term anyway, even if he survives this vote of no confidence next week. And it does look likely that Ash Reagan may present certain conditions to Yousaf and then end up voting for him in this vote. Even if she does do that, and even if Yousaf gets through next week, we could well get into a position very, very soon where the SNP is just losing vote after vote in Parliament. If you cast your minds back to the days of Theresa May and the end game of Brexit, when she just didn't have that parliamentary majority, she couldn't get anything through Parliament, she couldn't really govern. I think we can expect to see something quite similar with Humza Yousaf now that his junior coalition party and the Greens have just totally turned against him. So even if he survives next week, I don't fancy his chances for the medium to long term. No, he's been branded a dead man walking, and also he's saying he will fight on. Alex Salmond taking no amount of glee, I'm sure, calling him, he will be remembered as Yousaf the Brief. But nevertheless, he is limping on for now. We expected that, didn't we? Not a politician known for, how should we put it, putting the party or the country before himself. He will limp on, but how long can he carry it on? He appears to be mortally wounded in terms of his credibility or even his ability to rule. And then there's a bigger question, Olivia, of the withering prospect now of any chance of a second referendum on independence. Well, I think, to be fair to Humza Yousaf, I mean, he has played his hand pretty badly. He seemed to massively underestimate quite how angry the Greens would be when he dumped them unceremoniously from his coalition. But he played a very bad hand, badly. He inherited that seat from Nicola Sturgeon. He was proudly the Nicola Sturgeon continuity candidate, which by the time Sturgeon became embroiled in this huge controversy over SNP funding, which her husband too is massively caught up in, it became very difficult to be the sort of Nicola Sturgeon continuity candidate. Then, of course, the question of the second referendum has become more and more difficult to find a route towards a second referendum. The government here in the UK has essentially vetoed there being one in the near future. So there are people in Scotland now saying, you know, well, what is the point of the SNP? They've ruled for so long pretty much without opposition. By the time Humza Yousaf inherited that role, it was already very difficult. And it's just become a hell of a lot more difficult. Let's give him credit for a minute and say he'll be frantically now trying to do some deals. He'll be doing a Highland jig of any potential deal possible. He'll be reaching out to the Greens. He'll be reaching out to Ash Regan. He'll be trying to do anything he possibly can. What could he do you think, to offer the Greens? I mean, it all fell apart on when he backtracked, the SNP backtracked on the net zero targets. Maybe that was a case of reality hits ideology. They couldn't afford it. It was unworkable. Is there any way, do you think, that the Greens could be wooed back?
I think that is incredibly unlikely. The Greens and the SNP, their policies, well, I mean, there is a good argument that the Green policies in Scotland were simply unworkable. There are plenty of policies that the SNP has tried to implement at the Greens, and they just haven't come to fruition. They just haven't worked. And as you say, it did feel as though it was a case of reality bumping up against ideology when Humza Yousaf decided to chuck out that net zero, very early commitment to net zero. So I don't think there's any chance of wooing the Greens back. But I also don't think there's very much chance. I mean, Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, tabled this vote of no confidence in Humza Yousaf. Obviously, he's not going to be on side. The Labour Party, it is their, it's essential for them to get a big majority to absolutely smash the SNP. The idea that they might buddy up with the SNP even for some sort of confidence and supply agreement seems pretty absurd. And the Lib Dems in Scotland have called the SNP clowns. So every single party north of the border has come out really, really strongly against Humza Yousaf. His only chance really is Ash Regan.
It's an astonishing alliance. If you look at the Greens, the Tories, the Labour Party, the Alba Party, all joining forces. This is unheard of. They are sworn foes ordinarily, and yet they want to join up, seemingly in a singular motion, to give Yousaf the chop. Extraordinary.
Well, exactly. I mean, one thing Humza Yousaf really has done is united Scotland, but not united Scotland behind a second referendum, as he might have hoped, but united Scotland, at least Holyrood, against him. It is an extraordinary set of circumstances. I mean, looking at Anna Sanwa and Douglas Ross speaking in Holyrood yesterday, it looked as though they were from the same party. This is Labour and Conservatives coming down like a ton of bricks on the SNP. And you can see some of the sort of staunch rivals looking back at the SNP over years, absolutely loving every moment of this. And Alex Salmond, who of course fell out with the SNP party big time, really enjoying every moment of it, calling him Humza the Brief, I think was the nickname he used. It'll be fascinating to see what happens next week. I think it is quite likely that Yousaf sort of limps on, but will his position be tenable? Will he be able to govern? Will he be able to get any of his bills through? He doesn't have a majority, and not only that, but most of Holyrood, the majority by one of Holyrood, actively seems to loathe him.
Well, Olivia Utley, high drama indeed. They'll be dissing off the bagpipes, perhaps, for his funeral music. Thank you very much, Olivia Utley, on a dramatic day in Scottish politics. And, of course, we'll have lots more on that story throughout the show, and there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com. You've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country, so thank you very much. Now, there's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win a Greek cruise, travel goodies and a £10,000 tax-free cash bank balance boost. And here's all the details that you need to hop on board.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Coming up, the Rwanda bill was finally passed this week despite human rights concerns, but it's already causing a massive stir because, according to Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, the Rwanda bill is causing migrants to head to Ireland instead of the UK. Is he right? Well, I'll be joined by somebody who thinks that is a complete and utter smokescreen. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5. It'd be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote because that's
not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this and they will just say enough because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as a generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment and obviously our houses are full of items we bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them from
that was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
What is go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:23. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, the first cohort of people to be sent to Rwanda have finally been identified. With the Rwanda bill now law, the African nation has been declared as a safe country for asylum seekers. Number 10 now hopes to get flights off the ground as quickly as possible. Well, joining me now in the studio is our GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, it took them a while, but now finally it's been passed into law. They say they've earmarked around about 150 watertight cases to be sent as soon as possible. But the battle now begins, doesn't it? We know that the NGOs, the charities, the lawyers, the lovies, the Linacres, the ECHR, they'll all be going full guns ahead to try and stop it.
Yes, they will. And that's why the government has factored in, it says, 10 to 12 weeks. They'd originally said they'd get people on flights by the end of the spring. Well, we can argue about when spring ends, but I would say end of May. So they're looking now at mid-July. That is allowing for challenges, because let's face it, there are going to be. They say they've got the planes sorted, they've selected the people. They are a bit concerned about people absconding in the meantime. But I have to say, I know you're very sceptical. Plenty of people think not a single migrant is going to Rwanda. But the government does believe, and I was on the trip with the Prime Minister to Poland and Germany this week, and he was talking to us quite a lot. He's quite upbeat. They really do feel like at last they're making progress, and they are confident that they are going to get, as they have said, a regular drumbeat of flights going to Rwanda from the summer. Now, we shall see, of course, because We've yet to see anybody, but they do feel that they have turned a corner with this. But I think when the first flights do take off, that really will be a moment.
Stranger things have happened. This week we found out that Ryanair are prepared to fly those flights. So don't rule anything out. But, Catherine, now this has had another knock-on effect, another ripple effect. Ireland is brought into the equation. Sensationally claimed yesterday that 80% of immigrants now arriving in Ireland are coming from the UK. They're effectively saying that they're coming into England first, through Northern Ireland into Ireland, and that's because they claim Rwanda, which they've said is inhumane and they will not enforce, means that people are going to Ireland to avoid being sent to Rwanda. It's an astonishing development.
Yes, but to be honest, I think it was always likely to happen, because the fact is now Michael Martin, the Deputy Prime Minister, has said that this is happening, that the Rwanda deal that's, just passed into law is already impacting on Ireland because people are fearful of staying here. But the fact is, if you come into the United Kingdom, you can go across to Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom. There is no border between Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland. That was, as it has been for a long time, and it was a condition of the Brexit deal. There would be no hard border. So the simple fact is, they have no idea who is coming from Northern Ireland into Ireland. Now, the Justice Secretary that's quoted this figure of 80%, truthfully, they don't know this. They cannot know this because these people coming across at this non-border are not monitored. So I think in many ways it suits the Irish government to say, well, look, this is all the fault of the British and their Rwanda plan. Not our fault, because, of course, the Irish government are having a real struggle now with public sentiment. The numbers of people arriving in Ireland going up. There's been protests, there's a housing crisis, etc. It's very difficult. This is a convenient way for them to pass the buck. Number 10 this lunchtime saying, let's not jump to any conclusions. But I have to say, this is quite good for the government, isn't it? Because the flights are not taking off. But they're saying, well, Ireland are saying people are scared to stay in Britain. The deterrent effect is already working.
Except a lot of people in Ireland aren't buying that. We're going to speak to a political leader in the next hour, Herman Kelly, who thinks this is a complete and utter smokescreen. You've got some figures there, haven't you, Catherine, about the shocking amount of people who've been refused asylum in Ireland, who've even been deported, a shockingly low deportation number.
Yeah, since the start of 2023, 7,300 were refused refugee status in Ireland.
So they should be deported?
Should have gone. Less than 100 have actually gone. So, it's very easy to look at what's happening in the United Kingdom, looking at the people crossing on the boats from the beaches in France. Horrific, the events in the Channel with those 5 deaths on Tuesday morning. Horrific, too, the violence of these gangs, with weapons going for the police. Quite dangerous for the police on the French beaches too. But, other countries have these challenges too. We are not alone. And in fact, across Europe, there is increasing talk about how do we deal with this. The numbers into Britain are actually lower than lots of countries. I mean, Italy, of course, is right on the sharp end of this, and other countries looking at offshore processing too.
And people with good memories may well remember we saw those dramatic scenes in Dublin where vehicles were set fire to because people were very angry about a stabbing by a failed asylum seeker there. Last night, another asylum seeker centre about an hour's drive south of Dublin was also firebombed. Nobody was inside, nobody was hurt. But Ireland is a real powder keg around this issue, and the people are saying enough is enough. They're being called far right. Leo Varadkar has stepped down over this. The people are getting fed up of it, and they can't keep blaming Britain and Rwanda. They need to take ownership of their own issues, surely.
Yeah, and the thing is that Ireland, geographically, it's right on the outer edge of Europe. My family are from Northern Ireland, so a little bit different. But, Ireland is very different to the rest of Europe. They're simply not used to this sort of level of numbers of people coming in. And the population of Ireland itself is quite small too. So it really is having a disproportionate impact. So it's not just in the United Kingdom that a lot of people feel that their governments are letting them down on not controlling the borders. It's happening in Ireland. It's happening right across Europe.
Catherine Fawcett, excellent as ever, and please stick with us because we've got some dramatic, sensational footage of that firebombing last night and the police reaction. It's an astonishing situation, and we'll talk to a political leader to give us the full inside story of an island that really feels on the brink. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. As yet another pro-Palestinian protest takes the streets of London tomorrow, I'll be joined in the studio by the organiser of the counter-protest. But will we see more conflict in the capital this weekend? That's all coming up. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it is Tamsin Roberts.
Martin, thanks very much and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 3:30. Scotland's First Minister says he will not resign ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. Humza Yousaf says as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday. But the First Minister says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition. Will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job. And when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Students in Paris have occupied the prestigious Sciences Po University to demand the institution condemns Israel's actions in Gaza. Chanting their support for the Palestinians and waving flags, many of the protesters can also be seen wearing headscarves and face coverings in solidarity with the people of Gaza. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. A 20-year-old man has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. Dylan Earle is accused of masterminding an arson plot on London businesses after allegedly being recruited as a Russian spy. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, but were not required to enter any pleas. Those are the headlines, and for the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2496 and €1.1674 euros. The price of gold is £1,873 and 21 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,137 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now we've got loads more still to come in a few minutes. GB News' political editor Chris Hope asked Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves how involved Tony Blair is in the Labour Party, and her full and frank answer, well, it might give you sleepless nights. You will not want to miss this one. Is Blair the backseat driver? But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us, and here's Bev Turner with all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel. M6 southbound still queuing from the Knutsford services down to Stoke at 16, but the earlier collisions cleared. Big queues northbound for the M5, the start around 18A, patchy congestion up to Thornbury 14 following an earlier car fire. Northbound M1's part blocked around junction 10, a 3-mile queue at the scene of a collision. Now there's queues anti-clock on the M25 just after junction 27. There's a breakdown to anti-clock after Enfield 25 blocking lane 1. Traffic is blocked to anti-clock Staines 13 to the M3 at 12, queuing back to Heathrow at the scene of a collision, and a breakdown anti-clock 2 after Godstone at 6. And the northbound M11 shut at junction 6 for the M25. There's long delays building back toward Loughton at 5. There's an overturned lorry there this afternoon too. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Men's mental health. Men are starting to talk a lot more. You've been through a lot of stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, the last few years for me have been very, very difficult. People see me on tour, performing, making music, but myself and my wife, we went through 2 miscarriages. For us, that was a very devastating time and very difficult to know how to kind of process those emotions. And I guess as a man, I did the thing of bottling up my emotions, and where I feel comfortable to be able to express myself is in the studio, whereas, she had obviously a different reaction to, what happened to us, because not only was it happening to her mentally, psychologically, but it was happening to her physically as well. And I think something that she really wanted to see from me was that sensitivity and that emotion. And I thought that as a man, being strong was trying to bottle up my emotions and just show her that, that I'm being strong for her. But actually being strong is talking about it. And what's happened ever since I've started to talk about it is I've spoken to more men that have experienced baby loss. My wife forced out of me, how do you feel? And I ended up as a mess on the floor. I was exasperating, crying, almost inconsolable. She was just holding me in her arms as we cried together, and and I didn't realise I needed that release so badly. Like I said, I've been able to speak to other men, and we've been able to cry together, and they shared their own experiences, which they did similar to me. But actually, as men, I feel like that conversation and that sensitivity and being able to be emotional together.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:37. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, tomorrow, a group of pro-Israeli protesters calling themselves Enough is Enough will stage a counter-demo against the latest pro-Palestine march. And the group's leader, Atay Galmundi, joins me now in our studio. Welcome to the studio. We met on Parliament Square.
We met outside Parliament Square about a week ago.
That's right. You were being harangued by some pro-Palestinian protesters for many, many months. You guys were expected to sit down and be quiet. Now you're standing up and making yourselves heard. What made you come to that conclusion?
Well, it's been 5 months we've been anticipating and waiting for the Metropolitan Police to really police those marches. We've been sold on the idea that those marches are peaceful, and we see week in, week out, anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish remarks, the sentiment of violence and a mob rule, basically. And we felt that we had enough. I want to just correct you. It's not a pro-Israeli protest. It's an anti-terror protest.
Got you.
We don't have a problem with the pro-Palestinians. We have a problem with people who openly support terror on our streets, and this is something we will not tolerate.
OK. And we can see some footage here from the last time you had a gathering. And can you tell me, you sent through some footage earlier of the kind of vile abuse that you've been facing. Itai, what kind of things have been screamed at you?
Well, as you can see from the films we sent in, you have people calling us killers, baby killers, rapists, accusing us of the same horrible things that Hamas did on the massacre of the 7th of October. We have people that openly threaten to kill us in front of the Met Police, and the police just tell them, move on, because they're afraid to confront them. And I understand those police officers. They are outnumbered and they don't feel safe. And this is what we want to be changed. We want the police to enforce the rules that already exist. They just need to enforce them.
Itai, we talk a lot in the studio across the country about two-tiered policing. I've been on these protests myself. I've had stuff thrown at me. I've been harangued, but nothing compared to what you're talking about here. A death threat openly happened in front of a copper and they simply did nothing?
Yeah, it took them 15 minutes and intervention of a KC that happened to be in the crowd and saw everything. And even then, it took them 15 minutes to arrest the guy. I filed a complaint personally, never heard anything about the complaint. It's been now almost 3 weeks. We haven't even got a reference number to show for.
Of course, the police aren't here, and they maybe would argue that a different case...
Could be, and I don't accuse anyone without knowing, but...
And often people are arrested for their own safety's sake, but nevertheless, across the board of your attendees, of your comrades, of your friends on these marches, there has been a huge uptick in anti-Semitism. The figures speak for themselves, between 7, 8, 900%, depending on which month you take. Tell me about the mood amongst British Jews now, particularly in London. We knew initially after October 7th there was a huge sense of fear. Are you now becoming more defiant? Are you more determined to stand up and be heard?
Look, the Jewish people are a resilient people. We passed in our history far worse, and we survived, and we will survive, and we'll be standing strong. We, like every other law-abiding citizen in this country, believe that law should be upheld, and we have our rights, and we demand that our rights will be protected, just like any other minority in this country.
And that's it.
I think that summarizes it all.
Okay, well, I wish you the very best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please join us on tomorrow at 12:30 in Waterloo Place.
There you go. You've heard it here first. Thank you for joining us. Itai Galmonday in the studio. That march, of course, is tomorrow. Plenty more coming up on today's show. You're not going to want to miss this, because we'll be debating why support for the Labour Party amongst GB News viewers has soared by an astonishing 13% in the last 5 years. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning, a further batch will arrive into the south east. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well. The best of sunshine will be in the morning on Saturday. The cloud will bubble up just as it has done today, and there is a risk of a few showers breaking out here and there, particularly at the coasts. For parts of Wales and central areas, it'll be quite cloudy and a cold feeling day. And into the southeast, we start to see some showery outbreaks of rain by the afternoon, and it will start to feel a bit warmer. Now, those showery outbreaks of rain become a large swathe of rain for Sunday, so more areas are going to see a wetter day on Sunday, particularly across eastern areas and across southern areas of England. Now, that rain will move out into the North Sea through Monday, and it's going to turn considerably milder with highs of 19 degrees on Tuesday.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 3:45. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and his shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves have been visiting the North East today to learn about how cost of living challenges are affecting locals. And GB News' political editor Chris Hope sat down with Rachel Reeves in the battleground Redwall town of Darlington. Take a listen.
Rachel Reeves, thank you for speaking to GB News here in Darlington. The NAO head Gareth Davis said in January that fraud and errors costing taxpayers $5.5 billion a year in universal credit, but you're going after tax avoiders, people who might be illegally avoiding tax. Why not go after benefit cheats too?
I've got no time for anybody that is cheating the system, whether that is benefit fraud or tax evasion, and indeed want to toughen the rules, for example, on non-doms to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share of tax. But I think that there is something particularly abhorrent about taking money from the taxpayer, because what you're doing then is depriving our public services of the money they need. And so we will crack down on that fraud wherever it exists.
Will the government bring down debt over the first 5 years of a Labour government?
Yes, I've set out a tough set of fiscal rules that an incoming Labour government will abide by to bring debt down as a share of our economy and to pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. And only subject to that, we'll be able to make the investments in the things to grow our economy and improve productivity.
The Tories will cut the civil service to pay for defence spending to keep us all safe and hit 2.5% of GDP by 2030. Will you?
Well, we've already said that we've committed to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence. The problem about the government's figures is they haven't set out how they will achieve it. And defence is too important to make promises like this without being able to say where the money's going to come from. So we want to get to 2.5%. We want to do that as quickly as possible. But we'll have to do a review of defence spending and understand the state of the public finances.
They say they'll get rid of tens of thousands of civil servants and pay for it, but you won't say that, will you? You can't cost your plan. It's an ambition, not a realistic possibility yet.
Well, when Labour left office in 2010, defence spending was at 2.5% of GDP. Since then, this government has made cuts that our army is now the smallest since Napoleonic times. It's them that have reduced spending on defence. We are committed to get back to 2.5% of GDP. Independent experts have said that the government have not put forward the level of detail that is needed. And I think defence is too important to make promises without being able to say how you can pay for them.
So yes or no, will you hit 2.5% by 2030?
Well, we will hit 2.5% and we'll set out the details of how we'll achieve that.
Can't say by when?
Well, nor can the government, because their plans are not fully costed and they haven't set those out.
On immigration, GB News polling this week shows our viewers really care about illegal migration. If 10,000 migrants are flown to Rwanda and it started to deter the small boats crossings, will you still cancel that project?
Well, not a single flight has taken off to Rwanda so far. In fact, the only people who have gone to Rwanda are Conservative Home Secretaries. We want to stop the boats. That is absolutely essential to get control again of our borders after the Conservatives have lost control. But I'm not willing to spend money on expensive gimmicks, and this has cost tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. That money should be put into cracking down on the criminal gangs and deporting people who have got no right to be in this country.
If it's shown to work, though, by the time you get into office, if you do, will you still scrap it?
Well, there's an awful lot of ifs there, Chris, because at the moment, not a single asylum seeker has been sent to Rwanda. The only people who have gone there are press teams with Conservative Home Secretaries. This is an expensive gimmick, and it's a distraction from the real work that needs to take place to get control of our borders again, and that is what a Labour government is determined to do.
The Tories say that the fact that illegal migrants are flooding into Ireland shows it's working by deterring people from staying here. Is that a good thing?
I mean, the idea that this government's immigration policy and asylum policy is working is for the birds. We've got asylum seekers in hotels up and down the country, in hotels that were once used for local functions, for weddings, for graduations. And it is not acceptable that the government have lost control of the borders in the way that they have. Labour have got a plan to crack down on the criminal gangs at the heart of this, and also to ensure that we properly process the claims and then people who have got no right to be in this country are quickly deported. The government have not been able to deliver that, and incoming Labour government is determined to do so.
Turning to planning, to get more homes built, you say your party will take a bulldozer to the planning system. You want more planning officers, redefine what green belt is as a grey belt. Is that enough to take on the NIMBYs?
Well, our approach is a brownfield first approach, and I was in the West Midlands yesterday in Birmingham and in Walsall, looking at two fantastic housing projects on brownfield sites. But the developers there say that what's holding them back from more development is a bureaucratic and sclerotic planning system that makes it so slow and more expensive to build the housing that we desperately need. But there are also parts of what we call the grey belt, which is a car park, perhaps, or a petrol station on what is designated as green belt. And it's harder to build on that than it is, for example, on a field in a town. That is wrong. We need to protect those green spaces in urban areas and have a brownfield first approach.
And that is a challenge. You won't announce where your new towns are till after the election. Why not?
Because we have a consultation on that in government. But we've got some fantastic new towns in Britain, from Milton Keynes to Welwyn Garden City.
They're very old ones, aren't they?
Yes, and those are new towns that were pioneered by past Labour governments that are beautiful places to live, aspirational places to live. And we'll consult in government about where the new towns of the future, so that families and young people have a chance of getting on the housing ladder again.
Do older people with a paid-for house, maybe paid off their mortgage, have a moral duty not to fight new development?
Well, people who have paid off their mortgage have often got children and grandchildren who are desperate to get on the housing ladder. That's why we've committed to 1.5 million new homes in the first term of a Labour government. But home ownership under the Conservatives has fallen by 500,000. The Conservatives were once a party of home ownership. It's clear today that only the Labour Party is the party of home ownership in Britain.
Just on Rosie Duffield, your colleague in the Labour Party, she says your party has a problem with women. Is she right?
Well, I'm really proud to be Shadow Chancellor in the Labour Party, and if Labour win the next election, I'll be the first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But what about her criticism of the leadership? He says that Keir Starmer won't speak to her. Rishi Sunak is nicer than Keir Starmer.
Well, I've been with Keir this morning, and he's out on the campaign trail right now. Rosie Duffield is an important member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. I've known her a long time. All of us over the next 7 days are going to be hitting the streets and the doorsteps as part of these local elections. But after that, we're back in Parliament, and I'll certainly be seeing Rosie then.
Perhaps an apology is due to her?
I'm not sure what the allegations are, but Rosie is an important member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and as a woman in the Labour Party, and along with Angela Rayner, in a senior position in the Labour Party, I'm really proud of the role that Labour women are playing in this local election campaign and the general election, whenever the Conservatives have the guts to call it.
Just finally, there's lots of talk about Tony Blair being involved in the reshaping of this Labour Party as it maybe gets into government later this year. Are you talking too much? Is he involved behind the scenes?
I've got a huge respect for Tony Blair, and I do speak to him regularly. This week there was a headline that says that an incoming Labour government will be even more pro-business than Tony Blair's was, and that's an important commitment from us, because I know there's not going to be much money around for an incoming Labour government. The inheritance from the Conservatives will be the worst economic inheritance since the Second World War, so it's important that an incoming Labour government, to grow the economy, to have the money for public services, works in partnership with business to achieve that growth, good jobs and prosperity all around the country, and that's what I'm determined to do.
But they're worried about your employment reforms, aren't they, about the issue for those on short contracts and whether they can get rights that we normally go to people who've worked there for a while.
The New Deal for working people is an important part of our growth agenda, because we need to get more people back into the workplace, and we need to ensure that, once again, that work offers the security with a wage that you can afford to live on and the guarantee of hours. But this is a pro-business policy, and we're consulting with business on all of our policies, including on employment rights.
Rachel Reeves, Fleming talking today to GB News here in Darlington. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, fantastic stuff there from Chris Hope. Included in that giveaway line is Tony Blair, really in charge of the Labour Party. Let's talk about first, it's your weather, and it's Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning a further batch will arrive into the southeast. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well. The best of sunshine will be in the morning on Saturday. The cloud will bubble up just as it has done today, and there is a risk of a few showers breaking out here and there, particularly at the coasts. For parts of Wales and central areas, it'll be quite cloudy and a cold feeling day. And into the southeast, we start to see some showery outbreaks of rain by the afternoon, and it will start to feel a bit warmer. Now, those showery outbreaks of rain become a large swathe of rain for Sunday, so more areas are going to see a wetter day on Sunday, particularly across eastern areas and across southern areas of England. Now, that rain will move out into the North Sea through Monday, and it's going to turn considerably milder with highs of 19 degrees on Tuesday.
That warm feeling inside from Box Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Queues northbound for the M90, junction 9 up to 10 for Craigend, slow going, a lane shut for a collision. There's one as well southbound heading down the M6, 10A, down towards Wolverhampton 10, queues back to 11 for another bump there. Now, the earlier breakdown southbound M5's gone down towards the M4, but still queuing in the roadworks. Northbound M1 around the Luton Airport Spur Road, junction 10, now still queuing in the roadworks following an earlier 3A vehicle bumper there, the queue back towards junction 8. Anti-clock M25, a lane blocked on the exit slip coming off at Waltham Abbey 26. There's a breakdown causing delays. A bump anti-clock on the hard shoulder, slow going, Staines 13 to the M3 at 12. Also anti-clock, a lane shut for a breakdown again. It's slow Chertsey at 11 through towards Wisley at junction 10. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the final week to see how you could win our biggest prize yet. With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections,
we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday, 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News. And we're broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. On today's show, under fire, Humza Yousaf has been called a dead man walking after a no-confidence vote leaves his future hanging by a thread. And after his first year from hell, can the SNP leader survive his nightmare of a week? Next, as immigration to Ireland soars, their Deputy Prime Minister has bizarrely blamed the UK and even the Rwanda bill. But after another arson attack on an asylum seeker site last night, an Irish political leader will tell GB News soon why the blame lies solely with Ireland's out-of-touch political class. And legendary political pollster Sir John Curtis has predicted a referendum to rejoin the European Union looks likely in the next 16 years. And soon on the show, he'll tell us why changing demographics and the Labour Party cozying up to Brussels are likely to be the blame. And Emmanuel Macron is calling upon EU member states to buy from European weapons manufacturers, saying there is no defence without a defence industry, in an effort even to stop the EU from dying. But is the continent gearing up for war? Well, how about just paying your NATO due, lads? That's all coming up in your next hour. Thanks for joining us on the show. Your pleasure. Your company is always an absolute delight. Now, we've got a political leader joining us shortly from Ireland. Dramatic scenes yesterday in Dublin. Another arson attack on a site earmarked for asylum seekers. Nobody was hurt, but Ireland is on the brink, on the knife edge. The political classes calling anybody who objects far right. And now they're blaming the UK. They're blaming the Rwanda bill. We're about to be joined by a guy who says the blame lies solely with Ireland's out-of-touch woke political class. Now, this show is nothing without you and your views. And let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join the conversation or message me on our socials. And of course, we're at GB News. But before all of that, it's your headlines and it's Tamsin Roberts.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 4. Humza Yousaf says he will not resign as Scotland's First Minister ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. He says that as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday. But Humza Yousaf says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition that will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job, and when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Students in Paris have occupied the prestigious Sciences Po University to demand the institution condemns Israel's actions in Gaza. Chanting their support for the Palestinians and waving flags, many of the protesters can also be seen wearing headscarves and face coverings in solidarity with the people of Gaza. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. A 20-year-old man has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. Dylan Earle is accused of masterminding an arson plot on London businesses after allegedly being recruited as a Russian spy. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning but were not required to enter any pleas. Both have been granted bail. A primary school teacher has pled guilty mid-trial to murdering her partner and burying his body in their garden. 50-year-old Fiona Beale had initially admitted the lesser offence of manslaughter due to loss of control after stabbing 42-year-old Nicholas Billingham. His partly mummified remains were discovered 4.5 months after he was last seen in 2021. Sentencing will take place next month. 2 men have been charged with immigration offences after the deaths of 5 migrants, including a young girl who were trying to cross the English Channel. The migrants were on one of several packed boats that launched from the beach at Wimereux in France on Tuesday morning. A man from Sudan and a South Sudanese national were both charged with offences related to the deadly incident. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves told GB News the government is failing to stop the boats.
We've got asylum seekers in hotels up and down the country, in hotels that were once used for local functions, for weddings, for graduations. And it is not acceptable that the government have lost control of the borders in the way that they have. Labour have got a plan to crack down on the criminal gangs at the heart of this, and also to ensure that we properly process the claims and then people who have got no right to be in this country are quickly deported.
To the US now, and the actress Ashley Judd says the overturning of Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction is an institutional betrayal. Her allegation of sexual assault by the Hollywood producer helped spark the Me Too movement. A major film star in the 1990s, she sued Weinstein in 2018, claiming he damaged her career after she rejected his advances. His 2020 rape conviction was overturned yesterday after a New York court ruled he didn't receive a fair trial. The district attorney will now determine whether to seek a retrial, though he remains imprisoned for other crimes. Ashley Judd says the courts haven't served the needs of victims.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. And our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence. I stand shoulder to shoulder with women who have bloody knees, because male sexual violence may knock us down, but we get right back up. And together we are in this struggle for freedom from male entitlement to our bodies.
Well, those are the top stories, and for all the latest, do sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or just go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back over to Martin.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, is Humza Yousaf a lame duck First Minister? Well, that's the claim of the Scottish Conservatives following the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing agreement with the Scottish Greens. But a defiant Humza Yousaf has insisted that he will fight on and will not resign.
No, I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition. It will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job, and when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Well, motions of no confidence have been tabled in both Humza Yousaf's premiership and now his government. But whilst he insists he will make minority government work, Ash Regan, the Alba Party's sole MSP and potential kingmaker or kingbreaker, in fact, in the upcoming no confidence votes, has said Scotland deserves and demands a reset. Well, joining me now in our studio in Westminster is our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, welcome to the studio. Always a delight. He said, I will fight attempts to oust me. For now, Humza Yousaf limps on, but how long can he last?
Well, he very much is limping. He's clutching onto the job by the tips of his fingers. There is going to be this vote of no confidence next week. As we know, the SNP is one seat short of a majority in Holyrood. That's why they had to go into this coalition with the Greens in the first place. Now, the Greens, the Lib Dems, Labour and the Scottish Conservatives have already all said that they will be voting against Humza Yousaf in this vote of no confidence. Presumably, all of the SNP will vote for him, which means that everything hangs on what Ash Regan chooses to do. Now, Ash Regan was SNP, MSP. She then defected to Alba after falling out with the SNP leadership over her position on trans rights. She's of the J.K. Rowling school of thought. She thinks that women's rights are being eroded. She didn't like the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland, for example. Now, when she left the party, Humza Yousaf said that she was no loss at all. Well, he might be regretting those words. Now, what she says will decide the future of his political career. That said, even if she does end up voting for Yousaf, it could be that in the longer term his position becomes untenable. People aren't happy with the state of the SNP, haven't been for a while now. Nicola Sturgeon and her husband's potential involvement in financial misconduct, alleged involvement in that, has cast the whole of the SNP under a bit of a cloud. And it could be that moving forwards, Humza Yousaf is just unable to get any legislation over the line, in which case he might have to resign anyway. What's astonishing about this, Olivia, is that sworn political enemies are jumping into bed with each other, such as their disdain, it appears, for Humza Yousaf. The Greens, the Tories, the Labour Party, the Alba Party joining forces. When the momentum is such, when the gathering is such against you, is there any way that Humza Yousaf could do a Highland jig and woo the Greens back on board? Can he offer them anything to make them change their minds? Or do you think this is just a fait accompli now? Well, I think it seems hugely unlikely that he'll be able to get the Greens to change their minds. It had already become a bit of a case in the Scottish Parliament of the green tail wagging the SNP dog. The Greens were having too much power, so the SNP thought, over their manifesto and their plan for governing. I think it's very, very unlikely that Yousaf will jump back into bed with the Greens. It was proved over the last year that that coalition is simply unworkable. And as you've said there, I mean, Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Anna Sanwa, they've both condemned Humza Yousaf in the strongest possible terms. The Lib Dems too have come down like a ton of bricks on Humza Yousaf. So he will probably try to woo back a couple of MSPs from some various parties in order to try and get himself over the line. But I think it's really, really unlikely, which means everything really does rest in the hands of Ash Regan. And isn't that an astonishing situation to be? They talk about political karma, but this is a script you couldn't write. It's almost a Hollywood ending. Here's somebody who ran herself to be SNP leader, and I thought she was a very, very credible candidate. She's an excellent politician, and then she, on a matter of principle, decided to step down on all the gender recognition stuff, and now she holds that solitary power. Will Yousaf try and attempt to woo her into not dropping the axe? Could she actually save his bacon? Well, she could save his bacon, and she's already written a letter to him, an open letter to him, suggesting that she will have some demands to make of him, and it seems quite likely that he will have to give in to her demands. And one of those demands, fascinatingly, was making sure that women's rights are protected in Scotland. So are we about to see an SNP about turn on issues of gender? That would be a really, really interesting twist in this tale, because that, and perhaps only that, could get Ash Reagan back on side.
But then they would have to do another spectacular U-turn on the Green targets. And isn't that the thing? It's like, can they trust Humza Yousaf at this point, or will he say anything to try and keep his own political career alive?
Well, this is the issue. It really feels as though Humza Yousaf is sort of juggling a lot of different balls at the moment, trying to be something different to so many different people. And as I say again, it really does remind me of those final days of the Theresa May premiership, where she was desperately reaching out to the Conservatives on the right of the party who wanted a harder Brexit, promising them little tidbits here and there. Then she was going to DUP, promising something different, throwing £1 million here and there for various constituencies in Northern Ireland, going to the left of the party, promising softer Brexit, etc. And eventually it just became unworkable. And I think Humza Yousaf may eventually find himself in a similar situation.
Fantastic stuff, Olivia Utley, always a pleasure. And now I'm going to be joined by the Conservative former member of the Scottish Parliament, Brian Monteith. Brian, always an absolute delight. Brian, an interesting thing about this is that people seem to think it's a given that all of the SNP MSPs will back Mr Yousaf. Do you think that's the case, or are they fed up with him too?
I think it's likely they'd want to show that they support him, but there may well be, over this coming weekend, a great deal of skullduggery going on, back-channeling, to basically try and get him to resign before he actually faces a possible denouement on Wednesday. There's also the possibility that he survives, but then we get to the Labour motion, which is in no confidence of the whole government. Now, here's an interesting thing, because political incentives suggest that all parties except the SNP would benefit from the government falling, and eventually there having to be a general election in Scotland for a Holyrood Parliament. Because every other party might think it would benefit and have more MSPs elected. So it'd be an incentive to bring down the government, including the Greens, including the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives. They all would see advantage in supporting the Labour motion. So I think he's really up against it here, because he could lose both votes, or win one and then lose the latter one.
Brian, knowing Humza Yousaf as you do, he probably will cling on for dear life until the bitter end, right? So what do you think is the most likely outcome if his leadership vote is lost, but not the entire party vote? Because as I understand it, the Greens have said that, yeah, they're going to go with the vote of no confidence against him as an individual, but against the SNP as an establishment, as an entity, that's less likely to happen, right?
Well, you might think that, but as I say, Mr. Yousaf has come over as someone who's rash, intemperate, and seems to make up things that go along and displays really bad judgment. He was right. I recommended it myself a number of days ago that he should be breaking his Butte House agreement with the Greens. But the way he handled it was a complete train wreck, and incited them to come out even before it had gone public, for them to start condemning him. I think he is a character who the SNP backbenchers will be beginning to think we would be better to shoehorn someone in advance of all these votes happening. But when it comes to a vote in the government, the Greens could see an opportunity for actually strengthening their hand, for negotiating a better deal so there's no election, or for going to an election and believing they could win more seats. Now, of course, in a general election year, all the parties are looking at that. They could see this sets us up. Labour in particular could say this will give us a platform for the general election if we do very well. And they're expected to do well. So the incentives are for a new government, not just the ending of Yousaf.
Do you think that if things come to pass and Mr Yousaf does fall on his sword, Brian Monteith, he might be remembered as somebody who was killed by woke? I mean, he backed the gender recognition bill, backed the hate crime bill, backed net zero targets and forced to do a U-turn on that. Meanwhile, the everyday matters of the electorate seem to care about the economy, schools, crime, the NHS, seem to be totally neglected because here is a politician, here is a party more obsessed with ideology.
Well, it's just like going back to student union days. It reminds me that when there were hardly any chances to hold the student union to account, they would do anything that they wanted, irrespective of what the mass student body would believe and want themselves. But when you could actually get a general meeting where people turned up, or a referendum of the students, then the extremists would be thrown out. And this is an example, I think, of going woke, going broke. If politicians do not actually listen to what the public want, they want their schools better, they want their healthcare better, they want their roads better, they want their housing. He cut spending on housing. I saw the clip you put up. He doesn't mention he cut it by over £100 million. So the truth is that whoever's in government has to get back to basics and making devolution work, not actually following some ideology that nobody really has a majority for.
OK, Brian Monteith, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Of course, Humza Yousaf will stick by his principles. He no doubt will say he believes he's doing the right thing by the climate, by gender ideology, by hate crime bills, and he will fight on. We'll be following that story, of course, incessantly with absolute detail as it rolls out over the coming days. And we'll have lots more on that story, of course, at 5 o'clock. And there's plenty of coverage on our website, gbnews.com, and you've helped to make it the fastest growing national news website in the country. So thank you very much. Coming up, the Rwanda bill was finally passed this week despite human rights concerns, but it's already causing a massive stir because, according to Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, the Rwanda bill is causing migrants to head to Ireland instead of the UK. I'll speak to a political leader soon who says that is absolute codswallop. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sadiq Khan has been accused once again of plotting to bring in a pay-per-mile charging scheme in London, after a Labour councillor said it was only ruled out for now. A spokesperson for Conservative mayoral candidate Susan Hall told GB News the mask has slipped, and Sadiq Khan's plans for pay-per-mile are as clear as day. The only way to get the ULEZ expansion scrapped and to stop Sadiq Khan's pay-per-mile plans is to vote for me on May the 2nd. Khan has faced significant backlash for his ULEZ expansion, which saw the scheme extended to cover Outer London. He has previously ruled out introducing pay-per-mile in London, accusing Susan Hall's team of spreading misinformation around the issue. However, Sadiq Khan's transport strategy appears to commit the mayor to conducting a review of road user charging schemes, which could involve the introduction of a pay-per-mile style levy. The strategy report was published in 2018 and revised in 2022. It says these could replace schemes such as the congestion charge, low emission zone and the ULEZ. In doing so, the mayor will consider the appropriate technology for any future schemes, and the potential for a future scheme that reflects distance, time, emissions, road danger, and other factors in an integrated way. Last week, a spokesman for Mr. Khan said, "This is an absolute nonsense from a Tory party desperate to distract from their 14 years of failure and is categorically untrue." Sadiq has definitively ruled out pay-per-mile. Pay-per-mile was first proposed in Boris Johnson's transport strategy when he was mayor. Nicholas Dunning, GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the emissions free.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:23. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, is the Rwanda bill already working? Well, with the plan to send asylum seekers to the Central African nation being legalised earlier this week, the Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland is now claiming many are already avoiding the UK and choosing his country instead. It's as the Irish government continue to deal increasing tension over rising immigration and housing shortages. Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, welcome back. Always a delight. So, the bill finally given royal assent. We knew that was coming. Rishi Sunak adamant the flight will take off, come what may. No ifs, no buts. Talking a good fight, if nothing else, within 10 to 12 weeks. He says, but Catherine, Ireland has suddenly hoved into view as an issue. Tell us why. It's a fascinating knock-on effect.
Yeah, it really is. As you say, not a single migrant to Rwanda yet, but the government are confident of sending plane load after plane load, they tell us, through the summer. So we shall see. But today, this big story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph saying that Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Martin, has said that the Rwanda bill that only became law yesterday, only finally got through that huge battle to get it through the Lords in the early hours of Tuesday, is already having an impact on Ireland, because he says what's happening is that people are fearful of staying in the United Kingdom, so they've crossed the channel on small boats or possibly on lorries. We know lots of people still come on lorries. And rather than staying in the UK, they're going into Northern Ireland. And then, of course, there is no border on the island of Ireland. You know, the EU were very, very firm on that. In the Brexit negotiations, there will be no border. So we effectively have a border down the Irish Sea for the purposes of trade. So basically, people come into Northern Ireland can then go straight into the south, no border, no checks. There's no way of knowing how many, but it's an easy way to get into Ireland. And then, of course, you're back in the European Union and you can't be sent to Rwanda. Now, the Justice Minister had said that they estimate that 80% of the new arrivals are coming that way. I have to say they can't actually know that, because the whole point of the non-border between the Northern Ireland and the South is that there are no checks. So they don't know this. But certainly, I think it suits them to put some of the blame for the problems that they're having, which are considerable, back onto the UK and also onto Brexit, rather than their own policies and, as some would see it, their own failures.
OK, Catherine Forster, is that the case? Well, let's find out now. Because joining us now is the president of the Irish Freedom Party, Herman Kelly. Herman, welcome to the show. An astonishing report that surprised us this side of the Irish Sea. So here we go. It's the UK's fault. It's Rwanda's fault. The soaring immigration in Ireland is all down to us. What's the reality? OK, we can't hear Herman again. Right, we're going to come back to you and we're going to get back to Herman shortly, I do hope. It's an astonishing situation, and what's been happening on the ground last night, for example, about an hour's drive south of Dublin, that a site earmarked for asylum seekers was a fire was set on, and police came along. We've seen, of course, previous riots in Dublin over this. Ireland very much feels on a knife edge.
Yeah, and it's quite extraordinary because Ireland, it's on the edge of Europe geographically, and in many ways it was sort of set in the past in terms of being progressive or not for a very long time. Now, under the current government, they've moved really very fast. Ireland has changed very radically. I mean, it used to be a deeply conservative, deeply Catholic country, but they want to be seen as progressive, to be moving with the times, and they're not bringing a lot of their own citizens with them. And this is really manifesting itself in these arson attacks, the riots that we are seeing. A lot of Irish citizens feel there's a huge housing crisis. We have one here. They have an acute housing crisis in Ireland too. They don't like seeing the numbers of people coming over. They feel that there isn't the infrastructure for them. And just to give you one figure, of course, the population of Ireland, nothing like that of the UK, but since the start of 2023, they refused 7,300 refugee status. Basically, they turned those people down, but they deported less than 100. So there's thousands of people have had their asylum applications refused in Ireland, but they are still there.
It's an astonishing state of affairs. So just to repeat that, 7,300 refused asylum in Ireland. At that point, they should have been deported. Only 100 were deported, and that's a pitiful 1.37% deportation rate. And yet, and that's historical, way before Rwanda came to pass, and yet the politicians in Ireland are blaming the Rwanda bill. They're blaming the United Kingdom as a way through the back door, as it were, into Ireland, failing to take any account of what's happening in this situation. And Leo Varadkar, of course, before he stepped down, was routinely brandishing anybody who objected to this as far right.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, Number 10 this lunchtime poured a little bit of cold water onto this. They said, you know, it's too soon really to make a direct link. But it suits the Irish government. And I have to say, this is no bad thing for the Conservative government at the moment either, to have this, oh, you know, it hasn't even started yet, but it's already putting people off. People like Marco Longhi are saying, you know, the fact that asylum seekers are now starting to go elsewhere is clear evidence that the deterrent effect is taking place. Well, of course, really what they want to do is stop people crossing the channel altogether. We saw, didn't we, those 5 deaths on the early hours of Tuesday morning, just after the bill had finally finished its passage through Parliament. 2 men charged today, that 8-year-old girl tragically killed. And a reminder that, you know, people are risking their lives. France, the rest of Europe, these are safe countries. But these people, this huge industry, these people smugglers making vast amounts of money, trading on human misery, putting people onto boats that are not safe. They're taking the gamble of getting to the United Kingdom, and sometimes they are losing that gamble. And the Prime Minister, who obviously been in Poland and in Berlin this week, I was on that trip, talking on the flight over there, we were questioning him about this, and he was saying, we are doing this for compassionate reasons. It's not just that we want to stop it because, you know, it's not fair. It's the right thing to do morally, because lives are being put at risk, lives are being lost, and this is not OK.
OK, thank you very much, Catherine Forster. Now, just to repeat, we will be speaking to Herman Kelly, who's the president of the Irish Freedom Party, later in the show for an astonishing overview of what's been happening in Ireland. Arson attacks, the police involved, quite incredible scenes. We will get back to Herman Kelly later in the show. But first, it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's with Tamsin Roberts.
Martin, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 4:31. Here are the headlines. Scotland's First Minister says he will not resign ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. Humza Yousaf says as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday. But the First Minister says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition that will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job, and when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Students in Paris have occupied the prestigious Sciences Po University to demand the institution condemns Israel's actions in Gaza, chanting their support for the Palestinians and waving flags. Many of the protesters can also be seen wearing headscarves and face coverings in solidarity with the people of Gaza. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. A 20-year-old man has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. Dylan Earle is accused of masterminding an arson plot on London businesses after allegedly being recruited as a Russian spy. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, but were not required to enter any pleas. Both have been granted bail. Of the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, in a few minutes' time, could we be dragged back into the European Union? Well, polling guru Sir John Curtis says a new European Union referendum could happen in the next 16 years. He'll tell me why soon. But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News. And here's Bev Turner with all the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. The northbound M90, the Bridge of Erne up to Craigend, that's junction 9 to 10, still slow, although an earlier collision has now cleared. There was one as well northbound up the M1, that's gone just around the turn off the Luton Airport spur road at junction 10. All lanes open, still slow though, of course, because of the ongoing roadworks. Now the anti-clock M25, queues for bump now on the hard shoulder, Staines 13 towards 12, it's slow back to Heathrow at 14. Once you pass there, Chertsey 11 anti-clock to Wesley at 10. There's a broken down vehicle causing more queues, a lane blocked. Clockwise M25, 2 lanes shut, 27 to 28 in queues. There's been a collision. And the northbound M11 still shut at the M25 at 6, queuing back to Loughton at 5. There's an overturned lorry causing queues on all approaches. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the final week to see how you could win our biggest prize yet. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:37. I'm Martin Daubney and this is GB News. Now, prior to Britain's official departure from the European Union in January 2020, many disgruntled Remainers took to the streets for months and months, demanding a so-called people's vote or a second chance to decide. And even following our exit from Brussels, many still hold hope that Brexit can be undone and Britain may one day rejoin the European project. Well, yesterday, one of Britain's most respected polling experts, Professor Sir John Curtice, spoke at an event for a UK in a changing Europe, predicting that Britain will indeed have another referendum on our membership of the EU within the next 16 years, owing to two things: ever-changing attitudes and movements in age and demographics, and also something else. It might be something to do with the Labour Party. So, is Brexit a done deal after all, or are we heading back to Brussels? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the legendary Professor Sir John Curtice. Always an absolute delight to have you on the show, John. So many GBNews viewers now might be choking on their tea. The prospect of a second referendum. Let us know, why do you think that's looking likely?
Well, let me give you the context of where this comment arose. So the basic point I was making at the time at the event a couple of days ago was that I reckoned that the referendum of 2016 would prove no more successful than the referendum of 1975 in resolving our relationship with the European Union, that we're going to keep on arguing and debating this. So that's crucial point number one. And remember that the referendum of 1975 was much more decisive in the vote to stay inside the then common market that it recorded than was the narrow vote in favour of Brexit back in 2016. So that's point one. Point two, then, something you've just referred to, is that you look at the demographics. Well, look at current attitudes. Current attitudes now, on the polling on average, it's about 58% of people who say they'd vote to rejoin. 42% say that they would vote to stay out. Now, that's not an impossible pressure for politicians to row against, but it's worth bearing in mind that we are already in a situation where seemingly more people would prefer to be in than to be out. Then, as you've said, the third thing we need to bear in mind is the demographics. And the demographics are such that it's older people still who primarily want to be outside the European Union, younger people who want to be inside it. And I'm afraid the natural rules of mortality mean that unless today's middle-aged people are persuaded of the merits of being outside the EU to a greater extent than they are at the moment, that gradually the British public is going to get to be more pro-EU. And the final point I would make is that if you certainly look at the composition of Labour support compared with Conservative support, you know, Labour's vote is still about 75% a pro-EU vote. Conservative one is about 2/3 a Leave vote. So it's still a source of division between our parties. And so the question then arises, well, will we find ourselves at some point in the relative, I mean, I regard 2040 as a relatively distant future, but that at some point now, given that structure, that the Labour Party and or the Liberal Democrats may want to say, well, actually, we should now be thinking about trying to rejoin the European Union. Maybe, again, much will depend on the state of the British economy, how the relationship, how Brexit works out over the next 5 or 6 years. But that, you know, none of us can forecast the exact pathway, but certainly you could see how, if indeed more people conclude that Brexit perhaps wasn't such a good idea, who knows, given we certainly have two parties whose support is very strongly coming from that direction already, they may at some point find themselves under pressure, despite the views of their current leadership, to be wanting to revisit the issue. And, remember, Martin, nobody thought until much before 2016 that we would ever revisit the issue again. So don't be entirely dismissive of the idea that perhaps we will once again revisit it somewhat earlier than might seem obvious at this point in time.
Now, Sir John, I want to pick up on a point you made, which really kind of caught my eye in your speech, and it says, how does our relationship with the European Union evolve? To what extent does the next Labour government soften it or not? Now, isn't this a key point? David Lammy has said an absolute priority, an immediate priority of a Labour government will be stronger ties with Brussels. Tony Blair, who we questioned Rachel Reeves today, seems to be much more involved with the Labour Party that perhaps might meet the eye. He, of course, is a huge Europhile. So is the possibility, a distinct possibility, that Sir Keir Starmer, who, of course, led the People's Vote campaign to turn Brexit around, could this closer alignment ratcheting back towards Brussels be part of the softening up of the electorate, getting us used to the fact that Brussels isn't the enemy? Without a referendum, we might find ourselves going towards Brussels anyhow.
Well, 2 points. I mean, one, I'm inclined to say to you, the electorate doesn't necessarily need softening up, because I've already suggested they've already softened to some degree. That said, well, 2 points to make. First is, what have Labour said they want to do? They said they want to have a defence and security pact with the European Union. And I think that probably reflects the fact that since we've left, the European Union has become geostrategically more important, not least Germany, because of the consequence of the Russian invasion into Ukraine. The second thing they said is that they want to have come to an agreement over food and agriculture, really, in a sense, moving in line our regulations to ensure they remain in line with those of the European Union. Now, whether that's something that can be achieved and whether it can be achieved quickly, while some of the experts will say to not necessarily obvious and not necessarily something the European Union will be desperately keen to give us unless we're willing to soften in other directions. That said, if you then go on to look at the polling evidence about attitudes towards softening, the issue that is still the issue that works in the direction of the pro-Brexit case is the idea that it gives us the ability to have more control over our own affairs. And that sentiment is not entirely lost amongst those people who say that they would vote to rejoin. So insofar as what Labour want to do is to have a focus on very specific aspects of our relationship with the European Union, that does perhaps focus rather more strongly on this issue of control. And insofar as there is an argument in favour of rejoining, the bit of the case that is weakest in the eyes of rejoiners is the issue of control. So focusing on the control issue very specifically is not necessarily the easiest way to softening up Brexit.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thanks for your expert insight. As ever, always a delight, Professor Sir John Curtis. Now, plenty more coming on today's show, including Macron is calling upon EU member states to buy from European weapons manufacturers, saying there is no defence without a defence industry in an effort to stop the EU from dying out. Is the continent gearing up for war? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning a further batch will arrive into the southeast. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well. The best of the sunshine will be in the morning on Saturday. The cloud will bubble up just as it has done today, and there is a risk of a few showers breaking out here and there, particularly at the coasts. For parts of Wales and central areas, it'll be quite cloudy and a cold feeling day. And into the southeast, we start to see some showery outbreaks of rain by the afternoon, and it will start to feel a bit warmer. Now, those showery outbreaks of rain become a large swathe of rain for Sunday, so more areas are going to see a wetter day on Sunday, particularly across eastern areas and across southern areas of England. Now, that rain will move out into the North Sea through Monday, and it's going to turn it considerably milder with highs of 19 degrees on Tuesday.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday the 2nd of May...
The people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections. We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 4:49. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. Well, to discuss politics in the studio with me now is the political commentator Andy MacDonald and the former Deputy Chair of UKIP, Suzanne Evans. Welcome to the show. So we were just speaking, fascinating, with Professor Sir John Curtis, a legendary polling guru, a moment ago. He reckons, Suzanne, within 14 years, there's going to be a second referendum to rejoin. And the key things are Leavers are dying out, but most importantly, perhaps, to us here, the Labour Party, if it gets in, will get closer and closer and closer to Brussels. What's your take on that?
So, heard it all before, Martin, to be honest. You know, leaders are all old people. Not true. Nobody actually knows who voted and how. It's all done on polling, and as we know, there's only one poll counted. We were going to lose the EU referendum, and of course there was a resounding win for Leave. I think also, in 14 years' time, I'm not convinced that the European Union is even going to exist to rejoin. I think it's quite clearly falling apart. No doubt the EU Commission did a jolly good job of making it as difficult as possible for Britain to leave the European Union, to put the frighteners on every other member nation. But people are very angry about what's going on. You know, Poland's furious, Hungary is furious. France, populism is growing in France. Of course, we've had Emmanuel Macron complaining about this this week today, talking about how the EU army, that, funnily enough, we were told didn't exist and wasn't going to happen. Do you remember that as part of the dangerous fantasy? Of course, Nick Clegg said. So now we've got Macron saying we need to boost the EU army. Goodness knows why. He's complaining that populism is the reason for this, and ignoring the fact that France is falling apart. You know, umpteen terrorist attacks, crime is rising, and all the rest of it. Worldwide threats from all over the place. But no, it's populism and anti-EU sentiment that's the problem. What a load of absolute rubbish. Yeah, I've always said I don't think the EU is going to last forever. You look at any kind of supernatural government that's tried to force disparate nations with different cultures, different languages, different ethos together. They've always fallen apart. The USSR, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia don't exist. I think the EU is going to end up going the same way myself.
In fairness, the Commonwealth has survived quite well, hasn't it? And that's a multicultural organisation.
No, it's not, because it's not supranational.
Let Andy ever say you had a good crack.
I did.
No, to be fair, I did offer the question there.
And Andy MacDonald, is this, though? A lot of people were saying they believe that Sir Keir Starmer is a rejoiner in disguise. A referendum won't be on the table, but slowly getting cosier and cosier and with the bosom boys in Brussels. is the route?
Well, perhaps, but he's made it fairly clear several times. He said it to a range of different journalists, different outlets, that the Labour Party, the next Labour government, and any Labour government that he is leading is not going to rejoin the EU. He wants better relations because, honestly, the Conservative Party have made an absolute mess of the post-Brexit foreign relations with the EU. But I would just ask, who is the Foreign Secretary at the moment? Is it not David Cameron, the man who, in fact, triggered the EU referendum, who led the case for remaining in the EU?
And then legged it.
So, I think if we're looking at people to trust on the European issue, both sides of, the opposition and the government have their skeletons in the closet. So I don't think going, Keir Starmer supported rejoining or remaining in the EU is really a fair line when the Foreign Secretary is, in fact, the man who caused all of the issues in the first place.
The man who thought we'd disappeared into the ether, and lo and behold, there he is back again.
And maybe that's the point, the entire establishment once again seems to be getting back towards Brussels, which brings me on to my next point. We spoke to Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves earlier. I put a question via Chris Hope. Is Sir Tony Blair actually pulling the strings behind the scenes? A lot of people out there think that's maybe going on. She was very effusive, saying, yeah, we speak to Tony Blair a lot. How much of an influence do you think Sir Tony Blair will be on Sir Keir Starmer and the future direction of the Labour Party?
Well, I think he will be actually quite a big influence. Now, you might also remember another famous quote when Keir Starmer was asked which he's felt more naturally aligned to, Westminster or Davos. The group of billionaire elites in Switzerland who meet once a year and try and formulate policy that is supposed to be rolled out for this one world government. Now, if Keir Starmer is in that camp, Tony Blair is very much in the Davos camp as well. He's I think, tipped to be the next head of the World Economic Forum. There's the mood music for you. Clear as day. Blairite, Davos, Starmer, Davos.
OK.
Quite clearly, I think they're in his pocket. He's the puppet master behind the scenes.
Andy, is it a bad thing? I mean, Sir Tony Blair knows how to win. Is that what the Labour Party needed?
I think, anybody hoping to be Prime Minister of any colour will look to former Prime Ministers from their party. Cameron said that he often sought advice from Margaret Thatcher, someone who won a lot of elections for the Conservative Party.
Should have listened a bit harder, he might have done better.
Perhaps he could, but, he only won, 2 elections, 1.5 elections. But, of course, Keir Starmer, who's hoping to win a landslide, anyone could dream of winning a landslide like the 1997 result that Tony Blair delivered. So I don't think it is a terrible thing that he is seeking advice from him. But also, he runs the Tony Blair Institute. This is a huge think tank, so many researchers, so much funding. You would be silly not to take into account, some of the research that's going out there. They've got former Conservative advisors, former Lib Dem advisors, former Labour advisors working at the Tony Blair Institute. They're doing a lot of great stuff on AI and tech. So I think it's not silly for him to be listening to someone with such a powerful think tank behind them.
And maybe that's why Sir Tony Blair wants to get involved. He could get quite a good few quid out of it, couldn't he? Anyway, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Suzanne, and Andy will come back to you, of course, in the next hour. Thank you very much. Now, plenty more coming up later in the show, so stay tuned. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, but first, it's your weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning, a further batch will arrive into the south east. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well. The best of sunshine will be in the morning on Saturday. The cloud will bubble up just as it has done today, and there is a risk of a few showers breaking out here and there, particularly at the coasts. For parts of Wales and central areas, it'll be quite cloudy and a cold feeling day. And into the southeast, we start to see some showery outbreaks of rain by the afternoon, and it will start to feel a bit warmer. Now, those showery outbreaks of rain become a large swathe of rain for Sunday, so more areas are going to see a wetter day on Sunday, particularly across eastern areas and across southern areas of England. Now, that rain will move out into the North Sea through Monday, and it's going to turn considerably milder with highs of 19 degrees on Tuesday.
Looks like things are heating up. boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. There's some queues on the anti-clockwise M25 this afternoon. Now, firstly, a breakdown Enfield 25 to Potters Bar 24, slow going, a lane out. Queues to anti-clock Staines 13 towards junction 12 for a collision near the hard shoulder. There's also a breakdown causing queues and a lane shut anti-clock, Chertsey at 11 to Wisley at junction 10. On the clockwise side of the M25, queuing from 27 to Brentwood 28, not helped by an earlier collision, but all the lanes are back open. Northbound M11 shut at junction 6 for the M25, long queues, an earlier overturned lorry being recovered. A lane shut northbound on the M11 just before the M25 at 6, queues for a vehicle fire, and in Kent the coastbound M20, Leybourne at 4 to Aylesford at 5, a lane shut in queues for a breakdown there.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you, and I hope you're having a very happy Friday. It's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the UK. Coming up on today's show, under fire, Humza Yousaf has been called a dead man walking after a no-confidence vote leaves his future hanging by a thread. After his first year from hell, can the SNP leader survive another nightmare week? Next up, as immigration to Ireland soars, their Deputy Prime Minister has bizarrely blamed the UK and even the Rwanda bill. But after another arson attack on an asylum seeker site last night about an hour from Dublin, an Irish political leader has told GB News why the blame lies solely with Ireland's out-of-touch politicians. And Prince Harry dons military medals in his sunny Montecito mansion to give an award to a soldier despite being stripped of his titles. I'm asking, should Prince Harry give up his military medals? And this one will ruffle some feathers out there, which is why we're doing it. And here's the question. Has feminism left middle-aged women single, childless and depressed? Well, that will be the big debate. Has feminism made women miserable? And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a delight to have your company. Shortly, I'll be talking to a political leader in Ireland. Hugely dramatic scenes last night, about an hour from Dublin. A site earmarked for asylum seekers suffered what appears to be an arson attack. There have been a spate of them in Ireland. You recall there was violence on the streets of Dublin after a failed asylum seeker stabbed 3 people, including a child and a teacher. Ireland is full, they keep saying. Enough is enough, yet politicians call them far right or racists for speaking out now. They are even blaming the Rwanda bill and even the UK for soaring immigration to Ireland. I'll be joined by a political leader who says that is absolute balderdash. Now, the show is nothing without your views, and get in touch, please. There's a new way of doing it. Go to gbnews.com/your say and fire those comments across. I'll read out a bunch before the end of the show. But now it's time for your news headlines, and it's Tamsin Roberts.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. Here are the top stories at 5:02. Humza Yousaf says he will not resign as Scotland's First Minister ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. He says that as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday. But Humza Yousaf says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition. That will not be taking part. It will be getting, of course, on with the job. And when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Police have named 2 teachers injured in an alleged knife attack in Amman Valley School as Fiona Elias and Liz Hopkins. They were taken to hospital on Wednesday along with a teenage pupil with non-life-threatening injuries. Assistant head teacher Miss Elias thanked pupils for their resilience and said the incident has had an enormous impact on her colleagues. Meanwhile, Miss Hopkins said she was deeply indebted to all the emergency services for their quick response. A teenage girl has been remanded to youth detention after being charged with attempted murder. A 20-year-old, A 20-year-old man has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. Dylan Earle is accused of masterminding an arson plot on London businesses after allegedly being recruited as a Russian spy. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, but were not required to enter any pleas. Both have been granted bail. A primary school teacher has pled guilty mid-trial to murdering her partner and burying his body in their garden. 50-year-old Fiona Beale had initially admitted the lesser offence of manslaughter due to the loss of control after stabbing 42-year-old Nicholas Billingham. His partly mummified remains were discovered 4.5 months after he was last seen in 2021. Sentencing will take place next month. 2 men have been charged with immigration offences after the deaths of 5 migrants, including a young girl who were trying to cross the English Channel. The migrants were on one of several packed boats that launched from the beach at Wimereux in France on Tuesday morning. A man from Sudan and a South Sudanese national have been charged with offences related to the fatal incident. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves told GB News the government is failing to stop the boats.
We've got asylum seekers in hotels up and down the country, in hotels that were once used for local functions, for weddings, for graduations. And it is not acceptable that the government have lost control of the borders in the way that they have. Labour have got a plan to crack down on the criminal gangs at the heart of this, and also to ensure that we properly process the claims and then people who have got no right to be in this country are quickly deported.
Students in Paris have occupied the prestigious Sciences Po University to demand the institution condemns Israel's actions in Gaza. Chanting their support for the Palestinians and waving flags, many of the protesters can also be seen wearing headscarves and face coverings. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. To the US now, and the actress Ashley Judd says the overturning of Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction is an institutional betrayal. Her allegation of sexual assault by the Hollywood producer helped spark the Me Too movement. A major film star in the 1990s, she sued Weinstein in 2018, claiming he damaged her career after she rejected his advances. In 2020, the rape conviction was overturned yesterday after a New York court ruled he didn't receive a fair trial. The district attorney will now determine whether to seek a retrial, though he remains in prison for other crimes. Ashley Judd says the courts haven't served the needs of victims.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. And our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence. I stand shoulder to shoulder with women who have bloody knees. Because male sexual violence may knock us down, but we get right back up. And together we are in this struggle for freedom from male entitlement to our bodies.
Well, those are the top stories, and for all the latest, do sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, back to Martin.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, is the writing on the wall for Humza Yousaf? Well, the Scottish Conservatives have confirmed they will back a Labour-led motion of no confidence in the Scottish Government, meaning both of the main opposition parties will support no confidence motions tabled against both Humza Yousaf and his entire government. And this comes after the leader of Scottish Labour, Anna Sarwar, confidently predicted that it was a question of when, not if, Humza Yousaf finally resigns. But the First Minister insists he is going nowhere.
No, I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition that will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job, and when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Well, is Humza Yousaf a dead man walking, or could there be one final Highland fling? Well, I'm joined now by GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Tony, I keep saying it, the sun is shining on you, but the storm clouds are gathering around Humza Yousaf. We're just about approaching the end of the week. He's survived the week. Can he limp on?
Well, it's interesting, Martin. You know, when you said that to me the last time, I was actually convinced. I was reminded of something that happened last weekend. Humza Yousaf spoke at the Believe in Scotland independence rally in Glasgow, and he came out on stage and he said, "The sun always shines on the righteous." Now, Scottish political opposition parties, they'll be feeling pretty righteous with the way that this week has ended. And because it is Friday afternoon, well, I thought no better way than to give a rundown of where we are at with all the major political players here in Scotland. So, as you mentioned there, obviously, Anas Sarwar, he had put in his motion of no confidence against Humza Yousaf's government, and that has then gone on to be backed by Douglas Ross and the Scottish Conservatives, who say they will vote for that. Now, Anas Sarwar, he's said that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and it's untenable that the SNP can assume that it can impose another unelected First Minister in Scotland to replace Mr Yousaf without an election. Now, Douglas Ross, obviously leader of the Scottish Conservatives, he said that, well, you know, it wasn't necessarily him seeing eye to eye with Anas Sarwar on a lot of things. Ultimately, he wants to support this Labour motion because he wants to get rid of the Scottish Government, quite simply. And on top of that, he knows that he is on the brink of removing Humza Yousaf, of course, from his own vote of no confidence, which he lodged yesterday during FMQs. Now, they're almost the givens, so into the more interesting territory. Alba, of course, the other Scottish independent party, they understand that Anna Sarwar's, they think, is grandstanding, and it's just an attempt to remain relevant. Meanwhile, obviously, Ash Regan, who we've spoke about at length about how she could potentially be the kingmaker or kingbreaker, if you like, well, she's actually given a list of asks of Humza Yousaf if he is to expect her support next week, and that includes typical things like having independence at the top of the agenda, as well as more protection for women's and children's rights. Interesting development this afternoon, though. She also wants the Scottish Government to invest in Grangemouth refinery. Of course, that was announced that was going to be closing in November last year with the loss of several hundred jobs. Well, she's asked for the Scottish Government to invest in that and save some of those jobs. I can't imagine that investing in an oil refinery is going to sit well with the Greens, and essentially it's giving this impression, certainly, that she is making Humza Yousaf choose between Alba's support or the Greens. Now, Patrick Harvey, one of the jilted co-leaders of the Scottish Greens, who walked out of Bute House just yesterday morning, left the government. He has said that it's pretty clear that Humza Yousaf is unable to unite Holyrood. It certainly seems like this week has taken its toll on Humza Yousaf and the Scottish Government.
Well, Tony Maguire, on a wonderful Friday evening like that in Edinburgh, most people now be clocking off and heading down the boozer. Humza Yousaf, you suspect, will be going home to hide under the duvet. Tony Maguire, thank you very much for your input. These past few days been excellent. So let's get the thoughts now of the writer at Think Scotland, Dean Thompson. Dean, welcome to the show. By any reckoning, it's been a nightmare of a week, and the incredible thing is that the Greens have teamed up with the Tories, with the Labour Party, with the Alba Party. Historically, sworn foes have become friends to unite in the singular purpose of removing Humza Yousaf. Is he a dead man walking?
Well, yes. I think it's just a question of when, not if, that he's ultimately pushed out. By all accounts, Humza Yousaf's greatest problem is that he's not very good at politics. His political judgment has been pretty poor, even since the SNP leadership elections were ongoing. And by all accounts, people who I talk to say in person he's a very charming, very nice person. But I think charm was mistaken for competence. And the lack of political competence and judgment has put him in a position where he has alienated all the opposition parties against him.
Do you think there's any way out of this, Dean Thompson? There have been rumours that he's desperately trying to talk to the Greens to form some kind of deal. And of course, Ash Regan, they were once colleagues, they were once friends. Is there any way, because she could be that deciding piece of the jigsaw, the kingmaker, the kingbreaker, is there anything that he could offer to her to stop her from dropping the executioner's sword?
Well, it's unclear which option is the least worst, if I can put it like that, for the First Minister. On the one hand, you've got Ash Regan. Her list of demands: more independence, a referendum on giving Holyrood the power to call a referendum, a really madcap idea, which would probably not be binding or constitutional. Also very gender sceptical. It would require Humza Yousaf to U-turn on pretty much everything on the cultural side of things. That would be politically damaging. Humza Yousaf in Alex Salmond's pocket. You can imagine how that would go. On the other hand, does he try and stitch something back up with the Greens? Now, unlikely though it is, there might be a world where he could convince the Scottish Greens to abstain in any of these votes of no confidence. I have noted that Lorna Slater's went from yesterday saying the First Minister can no longer be trusted to today saying we could have that conversation again, which kind of opens the suggestion that the Scottish Greens maybe don't want to vote to bring down Humza Yousaf if the Queen over the water is a socially conservative Kate Forbes, because they have their own voters to answer to. So it's not, and then of course you've got the wild cards. Fergus Ewing, he's certainly got a history of being bold against the SNP leadership. What does he do? It's unclear what the best option is that does not result in a lame duck First Minister who is politically discredited.
OK, Dean Thompson from Think Scotland, thank you very much for your input. And, of course, for now, Humza Yousaf fights on. He said, I will fight attempts to oust me. Defiant for now, but it's the end of the week, and a week is a long time in politics. Now, you get lots more of that story, of course, on our website. And thanks to you, GBNews.com is the fastest growing national news website in the country. It's got breaking news and all the brilliant analysis that you've come to expect from us here at GB News. So thank you very much. Now, coming up, the Rwanda bill was finally passed this week despite human rights concerns, but it's already causing a massive stir because, according to Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, the Rwanda bill is causing migrants to head for Ireland instead of the UK. Is he right? I'm about to be joined by a political leader who thinks that is absolute balderdash. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
On to another controversial character, this time Prince Harry. He's back in the headlines after a High Court judge ruled he must pay 90% of the Home Office legal costs for the case regarding the downgrading of his security.
And it could cost him in excess of £1 million. But he says he is determined to fight on. Let's speak to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. What do you make of this?
Well, it's a pretty hefty bill, Eamon. This all dates back, if you think, to 2020, when he stood back as a working member of the royal family. The Home Office downgraded his security, essentially, because he is no longer a working member of the royal family. Prince Harry argued that his family could not be safe in the UK. He also alleged that a paparazzi chased his car after the World Child Awards in 2021 when he came back to the UK. He sued the Home Office because his lawyers argued that he'd been singled out and treated less favourably than others in his position. In February, the High Court ruled that the decision to change his security was not unlawful or irrational, and they were entitled, the Home Office, to take the decision they did. Then yesterday, Prince Harry lost his initial bid to appeal that ruling from the High Court, and the judge ordered him to pay 90% of the Home Office's costs. But the judge agreed to a modest reduction, but that was only a 10% reduction, which is why we've got this 90% figure. But Prince Harry is going to directly appeal. So he does have the money to pursue these legal cases. He also has a couple of cases against various newspaper groups in the United Kingdom, and he sees it as his life's mission, really, to hold people to account, including the Home Office. But by doing that, he's also potentially bringing a bit of a hefty cost to us as a taxpayer, because this is the Home Office, who clearly is funded by taxpayers, and they're having to fork out this legal money. If Prince Harry wins the appeal, then us as taxpayers are out of pocket.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise and who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:20. I'm Martin Daubney, and this is GB News. Now, the first cohort of people to be sent to Rwanda apparently have been identified. With the Rwanda bill now law, the African nation has been declared as a safe country for asylum seekers at long last. Well, number 10 now hope to get flights off the ground as quickly as possible. At least that's the theory. And joining us now in the studio is our political correspondent Catherine Forser. Catherine, finally, the Rwanda bill, after all of that ping-ponging, more ping-pong than the Olympics, been passed, got voted through, today got royal assent. You've been with the Prime Minister this week. They seem at last confident this will happen.
They do. They're very upbeat. Let's face it, Rishi Sunak has had a pretty torrid few weeks, 20 points behind in the polls, scandal after scandal, William Ragg, Mark Menzies, all the rest of it. But this week, I think they feel they have turned a corner. They've got the Rwanda bill through. It is now law. They held a press conference. They said they're going to get a regular drumbeat of flight going from mid-July, 10 to 12 weeks, mid-July, I reckon. And talking to the Prime Minister, he was on this whirlwind tour of Poland and Germany, this big defence announcement. On the plane, he was telling us that they really feel confident. They feel that the people are going to go. They're confident it's going to act as a deterrent. And this was on the morning after it had finally made its way through Parliament, and at the same time, those tragic 5 deaths in the Channel, including an 8-year-old girl. And, you know, we've had the arrest of 2 people smugglers today. The Prime Minister was stressing that on the grounds of compassion as well, it's not just the right thing to do to act as a deterrent because it's costing us a fortune to process these claims, put people up in hotels, but that it's, he believes, the morally the right thing to do too, because it is going to, they believe, stop people making this very, very dangerous crossing.
Now, the numbers, Mr Sunak says there are now 2,200 detention spaces ready to go, 200 dedicated caseworkers ready to go. He reckons there's about 150 watertight cases ready to go. But we all know there's going to be a fresh onslaught from the legal system, from perhaps the European Court of Human Rights, from the NGOs, from the charities, from the laws, the lovies, the Linacreites. The battle's just beginning.
Certainly. I think the reason they've given this 10 to 12 weeks when they originally said by the end of spring, I think that is basically factoring in the fact that there are bound to be some legal challenges. Now, there's plenty of people, such as the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, the former Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, who says this is not tough enough, is simply not watertight. Number 10 believes different. Now, we won't have very long to find out. But, you know, they were saying we're getting people out of hotels, we're freeing up hotels, you know, we're getting people processed. They believe they've got a good story to say. I would say, though, of course, despite the fact that Rishi Sunak likes to say over and over again, numbers were down a third last year, the numbers so far this year are up considerably on where they were a year ago. And, OK, they've done a deal with Albania, but now we're seeing large numbers of people coming from Vietnam.
And let's talk now about the next ripple of the wave, if you like, Ireland. And I thought an astonishing front page of the Telegraph today. The Irish Deputy Prime Minister claiming that 80% of migrants going into Ireland originate from the UK, and it's our fault. And more to the point, it's the fault of the Rwanda bill. What does he mean?
Well, yes, because he is saying that the Rwanda bill, which has just become law yesterday, is already impacting on Ireland because he says people are fearful of staying in the United Kingdom. So what seems to be happening is they're crossing the Channel, going up through England into Scotland, crossing over into Northern Ireland, and then coming back down from Northern Ireland into Ireland, hence into the EU again, because, of course, there is no border between Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom and Ireland, because during the Brexit negotiations, it was non-negotiable, was it? There was no question of a hard border on the island of Ireland. So instead, we've effectively got this trade border down the Irish Sea that the Windsor Framework sought to address. Now, I have to say, the numbers that they've given, saying 80% are coming in that way, they can't actually verify that, because the whole point of this non-border is there are no checks. So they really do not know that. That is what they reckon. I would say I think it suits them to pass the blame for this back onto the UK, back onto Brexit, because they're having a lot of problems. There's a lot of tension in Ireland now about the levels of illegal migration. We've seen lots of arson attacks. We've seen some riots. It's got very ugly and very, very nasty. So I think it is convenient for the Irish government to blame the United Kingdom. I have to say, I think it's quite convenient for the UK government too, because they're able to sort of go, well, look, you know, we haven't even got anyone on a flight yet, but already this is sending people elsewhere.
So do you think, I mean, in terms of stopping the boats, the best asset that Rishi Sunak seemed to have was the weather, because that was actually stopping the boats. And now, by some sort of twist of fate, that the people that we can't deport already to Rwanda now might be going to Ireland to avoid being deported to Rwanda, because Ireland has said, it's stated, it won't honour the treaty. It doesn't even think the United Kingdom is a safe country, because if they're returned to the UK from Ireland, they might go to Rwanda. And so Ireland, in a sense, has been hung by its own petard.
Indeed, indeed. And I mean, of course, there's not just Ireland unhappy with the Rwanda bill. Emmanuel Macron has been saying that it's a betrayal of values and it's going to prove totally ineffective. But of course, you know, we've got Ireland on one side, we've got France on the other. We've already assigned or given 480 million to the French over the last couple of years and the next year or so. And the French are having massive problems now on the beaches. We saw the scenes on Tuesday morning, these big criminal gangs, these smuggling gangs, people making a lot of money off people's misery, and increasingly violent now, these migrants, people with weapons being very aggressive towards the police. Simply, the police can't stop all the people getting in to these boats. And as we saw on Tuesday morning, in their haste to get people onto the boats, these smuggling gangs, we ended up with almost twice as many people as the boat could take, and then these deaths. OK, Catherine Forster, thank you for joining us in the studio. Always a delight. Now, across the country, nuclear test veterans and campaigners are suing the government over missing medical records belonging to those involved in atomic bomb programmes more than 70 years ago. Tens of thousands of British and Commonwealth servicemen took part in various operations, and now veterans want their medical records to prove that they were exposed to levels of radiation which have impacted generations of their family. Our reporter Jack Carson has this story.
Between 1955 and 1989, an average of 55 nuclear tests were conducted across the globe each year. More than 30,000 young British and Commonwealth servicemen served at British test locations in Australia and the Pacific Ocean. But in the years since, those who were involved say they've been ignored and lied to about their exposure to radiation. For decades, Lab Rats International has represented the millions across the world exposed to fallout from the testing programmes and the families who still suffer today from illness and deformities. In Gloucestershire, founder of Lab Rats, Alan, it's with veterans Dennis Hayden and Terry Hughes, who were deployed to atomic test sites. Dennis was posted to Australia in the 1960s and has suffered countless health problems he believes are because of his exposure to radiation.
We were part of an experimental programme that was set in motion right at 1952 at the start. They wanted to know the effects the radiation would have not only on the equipment that was being used, but on the men themselves. And that's why none of us had any protective clothing when we went to the forward areas.
Terry Hughes was part of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, the support branch of the Royal Navy. He was deployed to Christmas Island in 1958 and witnessed to the detonation of a hydrogen bomb.
And the resident naval officer had to come out and explain to everybody there was nothing to worry about. It was only a bomb that would be exploded and we wouldn't feel any effects at all. And then we had a countdown for the bomb. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And once again we watch the fireball as it forms, proclaiming that Britain joins the United States and Russia as a hydrogen bomb power.
My wife had one miscarriage. My son can't have any children. I've got a granddaughter who has epileptic fits.
Last year, the government unveiled the Nuclear Test Medal, recognising the military, civilian and overseas staff and personnel who participated in Britain's nuclear testing programme in the 1950s and 1960s. But for Lab Rats founder Alan Owen, whose own father was a nuclear test veteran, the work is only just beginning. In September, they launched a legal challenge to the Ministry of Defence to provide the test veterans full medical records, which they say they've been denied access to.
We sit in this bubble as the nuclear test veteran community, fighting against the establishment. And they will say, ministers will go in Parliament and say, all you've got to do is apply for your medical records and they'll give them to you. It just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. They're not there to as easy, as accessible as just applying. They will fight you all the way. They will delay it.
In response, a government spokesperson said, "We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, which is why we have formally recognised them with an official medal. Nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service have the existing and long-standing right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pension Scheme. The fight for these veterans and their families lives on because thousands who came before never got the recognition and justice for their service." Jack Carson, GB News.
Fighting long and hard for justice, which they surely deserve. Well done. Great topic. Now it's time for your latest news headlines, and it's Tamsin Roberts.
Martin, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 5:32. Scotland's First Minister says he will not resign ahead of a crucial test of his leadership next week. Humza Yousaf says as a minority government, his party will need to make some concessions as it negotiates with other parties. It's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens yesterday. But the First Minister says he'll fight on.
I fully intend to not just win that vote, but I intend to fight to make sure that the government stays, not just the government continues to deliver on the priorities of the people, like, for example, investing in affordable housing. So there's all that political game playing happening from the opposition. It will not be taking part in it. We'll be getting, of course, on with the job. And when the vote comes, I fully intend to win.
Tensions have flared at the prestigious Sciences Po University in Paris after pro-Palestine students occupied the building. Police had to intervene after pro-Israeli protesters came to challenge them. Students are demanding the university condemns Israel's actions in Gaza. It comes after similar protests at universities in the United States and Australia. The Foreign Office has summoned the Russian ambassador after a British man was allegedly recruited as a Russian spy. 20-year-old Dylan Earle has been charged with conducting hostile activity in the UK to benefit Russia. He's accused of masterminding an arson plot on London businesses. 4 other men were also charged in connection with the same investigation. And in a separate case, a former parliamentary researcher has been ordered not to contact MPs after he was charged with spying for China. Christopher Cash, who's 29, and 32-year-old Christopher Berry are accused of offences under the Official Secrets Act. The pair appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning, but were not required to enter any pleas. Both have been granted bail. Well, for the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or simply go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Tamsin. Now, in a few minutes, the big debate: has feminism left middle-aged women single, childless and depressed? Is feminism making women miserable? But first, there's a new way to get in touch with us here at GB News, and here's Beth Turner with all of the details.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/yoursay.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. A few spots of the M25 really struggling this afternoon. Let's start anti-clockwise, junction 25 to 24, so towards Potter's Bar. A breakdown causing queues, a lane shut. A collision anti-clock on the hard shoulder, but big queue still stains 13 towards 12, slow back to Heathrow. Also anti-clock Chertsey at 11 to Wisley at 10, queues for a breakdown again, a lane blocked. And long queues clockwise too, 27 to Brentwood 28 following an earlier collision. Now big queues northbound up the M11. Firstly, it's closed at the M25 at junction 6. Big queues for an earlier overturned lorry. Up towards there, a lane shut for a vehicle fire northbound. Southbound M11, Saffron Walden at 9 to Bishop Stortford junction 8. Still seeing big queues as well. That's all due to an earlier collision this afternoon. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
And I did want to give you a platform, but I also want to give you an opportunity to apologise to anyone that you might hurt, and also give a message now to people who might want to copy some of the things that you've done, because people have copied it. So is there anything you'd like to say about that?
So the first thing you addressed, yeah, I do want to say sorry, because I did say sorry in the BBC interview, and that's the only thing they put out as a clip. So I don't know why they tried to do that, but I'll say it again on GB News here. I apologise to all the victims in the past that I've may have caused distress to, may have harassed, may have mentally tormented in any type of way. I apologise to them because I didn't mean to do that, and I was just having fun at the moment, but I didn't realise that it would have negative repercussions and negative effects on their psychological, way of thinking. So I apologise for that. And also, the one thing I have to say to young people is social media isn't real. What I've portrayed to the guys on the internet is that I'm this cool, I don't give a toss about anything. But me as a person, I really do care. And for people I don't really read comments on the internet, because if I was to do that, I would probably go into a depressive state. All I can say to you guys is believe in yourself, and there's bigger things you can do out there than just being an absolute menace on the internet or being antisocial. If you have ambitions, I like to read, I like music. I want to go deeper into my passion so I understand me as a person and not what other people think I am.
You are an articulate young man. You are obviously intelligent as well when you talk like this. And I really hope, for your sake and for the sake of a lot of people who did take a negative influence from what you did initially, that you really don't go back down that route.
I have a child as well, and I have to be there, not just for me, but for my child, for my child's mother, for my mother. I have to be there for a lot of people. It's not just me. So I need to put in the work.
Welcome back. We're on the final furlong. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. It's 5:38 now. The dictionary definition of feminism is the belief in social, economic and political equality of the sexes. Well, women have made huge political, professional and legal progress in the past century, and it's become normalised to have women in positions of leadership, and good luck to them. But in 2024, a prolific female journalist has argued that the shift to women focusing on careers rather than marriage and family life has been detrimental, and that the world we live in now would be alien to any ideal thought up early women's rights campaigners. Well, with me in the studio now to discuss this are the trade unionist Andy MacDonald, who might be a feminist, and the political commentator Suzanne Evans, who
definitely is a feminist.
Definitely is a feminist. Now, this is a fascinating article. It was by Petronella Watt today in the Telegraph. She said this: increasingly, I feel that feminism has failed my generation. Feminism made the error of telling us to behave and think like men. She's childless, she's single, she's miserable. She thinks there are a lot of people like her. What do you reckon?
I was really saddened to read her article, actually, because Petronella is arguably a very successful woman, and it was very depressing reading this article. She clearly is very depressed and very unhappy with her lot. But, you know, she was talking about things like the West has outgrown feminist philosophy and should cast it off entirely. That would be a complete disaster. I've always considered myself to be a feminist, even back in the sort of 80s and 90s when feminism was becoming less popular. And you only have to look around the world at how women are still struggling desperately. Countries like Iran, Afghanistan, where women are totally oppressed. Well, it could go backwards here too, Martin. Look at what we've just had recently with the whole trans issue. We've got men pretending to be women, going into women's spaces.
Feminism is always going to be necessary. There's always, I think, going to be a kind of patriarchy that wants to take rights away from women. I think that's almost, in a sense, the nature of things, and we always have to fight against it.
But the point of this article is that's all fine, but putting your career, putting your professional life first and putting off having children to the point where it's no longer physically possible because there is the biological clock. She is saying that a lot of people in her peer group, and I know a lot of women like this too, are saying maybe actually our parents had it right. Maybe our parents' generation who had kids earlier, like yourself, had the right idea.
Yeah, I had my daughter when I was 28. I was very lucky, but that came at a cost. That came at a cost of being in a relationship with a man who was, quite frankly, dreadful. And there's nothing worse than being in an unhappy relationship, as I'm sure anyone who's been there would know. And I think this is what really saddened me about her article, is that she said she didn't know any women of her generation who didn't have children and were happy. I know umpteen women who didn't have children who are extremely happy. So I think she's obviously in a kind of circle that's very different to mine. You can't have it all. None of us can have it all. And
but
if
feminism did promise all. I have to bring Andy in at this point. Andy, I don't know if you're a feminist or not. I won't out you, as it were. But from a man's perspective, I certainly, leaned on my missus to have kids. She wants to put her career first. She was 34 when we had our first kid. I was 5 years older. I basically emotionally blackmailed her into it because I do think that this generation of women were told they could have everything, but then if you put things off, in the end, you run out of time. From a bloke's perspective, what's your take on it?
I mean, I think, if you're going to bring children into the world, you've got to make sure that you're secure financially, socially. You've got a nice place to live to bring up your kids, a strong income to bring them up, as best as you can. And I think we live in an age where both parents are expected to work and both parents have careers. We don't live in an age where the woman just stays at home and cooks. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and with that comes extra challenges. Of course women want to work. Of course women want to be successful. You look at some of the most successful women in Britain. Most of them have children. It is true. If you look at even here in GBNews, Margaret Thatcher, someone that GBNews loves, she had kids. Yeah, but notoriously a parent.
But that's what that's what this article is saying. A great many people, Petronella is saying, don't end up having children. And it is true now that the birth rate of the UK is falling below replacement. We're having fewer and fewer children. We're having them later and later in life. If you have your first later in life, it stands to reason you probably won't have more than one. And as a consequence, we are reaching that point where there simply aren't enough kids being born. And a lot of that is lifestyle choice.
Well, it is lifestyle choices, but what's the alternative? You want to force people to have kids against their will?
You could incentivise them. You could pay them.
Well, I don't think that's right either, because nobody should be incentivised to have a child, because having a child is an extremely difficult responsibility, as anyone who's had one will tell you. It's financially tough on you. It's the physical toll is difficult on women, and the practical side. Well, no, come on, you just have the nice bit of making babies. It's quite hard actually giving birth to them.
I'll tell you why I disagree. I'll tell you why I disagree, and that is, one thing I think men are hacked off about is this thing of we're oppressing women. Like, I worked my whatsits off when I became a father to be a provider. My dad was down the pit 47 years.
I don't deny that, Martin.
In that generation, so blokes do their bit.
That's not what I'm saying.
And it means often we don't get to see our kids because we're always at blooming work.
And that's potentially wrong as well. And now we have, in this country, some of the best parental leave in Europe, certainly, and indeed across the Western world.
Not for dads, we don't. You get 2 weeks.
Well, yes, at least you get something, and there is a big push, as you know, to get a lot more than that. So that's good, because I think it's very important. When I had my daughter, I was working. I went back to work when she was just 2 weeks old. It was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I shouldn't have done it, frankly, but I felt under enormous pressure to do it because I was self-employed freelance. You're only ever as good as your last report.
All right, good. Well, let's move on to another story that's caught my eye this week, and this is a very surprising poll, you might think, about the voting intentions of GB News viewers. I think we've got some graphics we can throw onto the screen now. So the first one is voting intentions. So how do people intend to vote if they watch GB News? Now, look at these figures, Suzanne. It's incredible. So apparently 39% of GB News viewers are going to vote for the Labour Party, 28 Conservative, 20 Reform, 6% Lib Dems. I would say that's a very healthy electoral split, considering. But does that surprise you? Does that surprise you that so many people that watch this show are going to vote for the Labour Party.
It doesn't surprise me because, obviously, being on GB News quite regularly, I meet lots of people who recognise me from that, and they come from all walks of life. And I'm always amazed at the diversity of people that actually watch this channel. But I think this poll is really serendipitous because a lot of people seem to think GB News is the home of far-right extremism. Well, this just blows that out of the water, doesn't it? Now, OK, it was a small poll, just over 500 people. But come on, who on the left would have said last week that 200 out of 500 GB News viewers are preparing to vote Labour? Very, very few, I think. So this completely blows apart the GB News stereotype.
Andy, as somebody from the political left, what do you reckon to this?
I mean, this is... often people from my side of the argument, they say to me, Andy, why do you go on GB News? It's all in vain. Clearly it's not in vain. Some people have been listening. I think it's actually... I don't think the Labour Party bit is the most interesting part there. The Reform UK, that's 20%. That's higher than the national average. The rest kind of fit in with the wider national polls. And I think it is a bit odd that so many Labour Party viewers watch GB News because they're not very vocal with it. When you look on Twitter, most of them are Reform or the Conservative side of Reform.
We have to leave it there. Andy MacDonald, Susan Evans. I don't think it's unusual, and that's because I think this audience is the Red Wall, and the Red Wall, many of them lent their vote to the Conservative Party last time. You've been great. Thank you, the pair of you. Still to come, Prince Harry dons his military medals in his sunny Montecito mansion to give an award to a soldier despite being stripped of his titles. I'm asking, should Prince Harry give up his military medals? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning, a further batch will arrive into the southeast. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well. The best of the sunshine will be in the morning on Saturday. The cloud will bubble up just as it has done today, and there is a risk of a few showers breaking out here and there, particularly at the coasts. For parts of Wales and central areas, it'll be quite cloudy and a cold feeling day. And into the southeast, we start to see some showery outbreaks of rain by the afternoon, and it will start to feel a bit warmer. Now, those showery outbreaks of rain become a large swathe of rain for Sunday, so more areas are going to see a wetter day on Sunday, particularly across eastern areas and across southern areas of England. Now, that rain will move out into the North Sea through Monday, and it's going to turn considerably milder with highs of 19 degrees on Tuesday.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections, we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives. Again, down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. Welcome back, 5:50. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News. We're on the final furlong now. Moving on, Prince Harry has today come under intense scrutiny after he was seen wearing his military medals during an online presentation of the Soldier of the Year award. And though the Duke of Sussex is banned from wearing his ceremonial suit, he's still donned his medals, even though he's been stripped of his titles. Now, this has sparked a massive debate about whether the Duke should be completely stripped of those military medals. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the former British Army officer and defence analyst and friend of the show, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Always a delight to have you on. So let's cut to the chase. He's been stripped of his titles. Should he be wearing those medals?
Thank you, Martin, and good evening. I think the important thing here is, before I answer your question, which I will do robustly, is to differentiate between his honorary military appointments, like Colonel of the Royal Marines and so on and so forth, from which he was required to stand down when he was no longer a working royal, and the medals which he gained during his active military service in the Household Cavalry. And I can see absolutely no reason why the medals which he won fair and square should not be worn at any ceremony which he deems to be appropriate. After all, he won them, they're his. And frankly, if he chooses to pin them on his swimming trunks, that's entirely up to him. You know, there will be lots of the old and bold huffing and puffing from the leather armchairs in various London clubs over this. But the truth of the matter is he earned his medals, and we can snarf about 3 of them being Jubilee medals, which arguably, quotes on, he got from his grandmother, quotes off. But so did lots of other people. And so to me, it's just the same as me wearing my medals, and I only have 2 from my service, on Remembrance Sunday, on my suit or on my greatcoat. They're mine, and I can do what I like with them.
Now, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, I'm sorry to disappoint, but we don't have a picture of Prince Harry with his medals pinned to his swimming trunks. But on a serious point, a lot of people in the US veteran circuit, families, friends of those, are saying another thing, and that is that Prince Harry has absolutely no right to give an award to an American serviceman or soldier. It's not his business to get involved in the US military. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's a very interesting viewpoint, because historically, the US and Britain have been the staunchest of allies in lots of military endeavours. And, you know, you don't need me to recount history of the First World War, Second World War, Korea, the Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., etc. So there's the closest of relationships. And the other point I would make is that the award was made to this very brave ex-US servicewoman who was severely injured during her military service for her country and has overcome those injuries with some aplomb. And if Prince Harry putting on his UK military medals to make that award to her makes that a little bit more special for her, then who are we to deny it?
OK, thank you for your input, as ever. And that is former British Army officer and defence analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Thank you very much. I've got time for a quick couple of emails to blast through. Bass says this on the Labour Party. Rachel Reeves states Labour has a plan to stop illegal migration. Does it involve magic wands or money trees? Possibly even training flying pigs to tow boats back to France. I sense intense cynicism there in your take, Bass. Wendy quickly says this on the SNP. Born and bred in Scotland, back in my day, it was an amazing country, top-class education and excellent work opportunities. Well, we kept it running well. It's so sad to see what state Scotland is in now. Thanks for all of those. Now, thanks for joining me this week. I've been Martin Daubney. Next up is Jubes & Co. That's 6 till 7 p.m. Hope you have a fantastic weekend. I'll be back on Monday. But for now, it's time for your latest weather forecast. And it's Annie Shuttleworth. Have a happy Friday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It should stay dry for many of us through the rest of today, but there will be some heavy rain starting to arrive into the south. That's as this area of low pressure is arriving with these weather fronts. That's bringing the heavier rain we've seen across parts of Cornwall so far today, and that will continue to push northwards throughout this evening. So parts of Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, possibly South Wales will see some heavy outbreaks of rain through this evening, and then by tomorrow morning a further batch will arrive into the southeast. Ahead of that, it's going to be quite a cloudy night for much of Wales and central areas of England, but to the north of this area, across Northern Ireland and Scotland, another clear and cold night. So we're likely to see a frost again in similar areas to where we saw this morning by Saturday morning. But there will be a lot of sunshine around once again across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern England as well.